We are live. ALTBAYS Show brought to you by ALTBAYS.nz. We are a media support company that creates great online content. So if you want to be a YouTuber or if you want to run your own podcast, get in touch with us, ALTBAYS.nz, and we will give you a hand because we're great. Okay? And we have 1,100 subscribers on our YouTube channel. If you become a member, now you can become a member. That's the thing. So best way to support us, subscribe to our channel. Nice and easy. Just click the subscribe button. However, we've been doing this for 6 months. We haven't asked for anything. We are not making any money out of this.
The opposite.
The opposite. We are spending a lot. It's a big investment here for us, but we believe in what we do, and we believe, as it says on our logo, that communities that get together, they thrive. So we're putting a lot of effort in doing something for the community. If you want to support this show, if you want to see this show thriving even more and bringing more interesting people to have a chat, now you have 2 options. There's a button when you go on our YouTube page that is join. So by joining, you become a member of the show. It starts with a $5 contribution per month, and it goes up to, I don't know, have a look there to the tiers. Is that the word that I'm looking for? Yes. Different options, different products that we offer. And again, it's just to support us to keep this alive. We all have our full-time jobs. So we're working a lot over hours to make this happen because we love it. But obviously, if we can get a little bit out of this to bring more cool people, it would be lovely. And another thing that you can do, if you don't want to become a member, you can give us a one-off donation. So when we are live streaming, there will be a donate button and you can give any amount that you feel inclined. Just remember that YouTube takes 30% of whatever you donate. We don't mind. Shout out to YouTube. But just so you know. Okay? This show is live, and then as soon as we're done, it becomes available on YouTube. And tomorrow it will be available in all the main podcast platforms. So you just pick your favorite one, type ALTBAYS, and you will find us there. On my left, Brett Soanes.
That's my name, apparently.
Now it is. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Are you right or left wing?
Well, that's a very good question.
We were not even talking about that before, eh?
We're straight into it. Well, I would consider myself to traditionally be left wing, although I have voted right wing before.
Yep.
And yeah, I'm not 100% sure where I sit on the spectrum. Maybe we can find out tonight.
Do you feel like different countries will have different rights and different lefts? That's why sometimes people get a bit confused because like we watch the news from all over the world. Sometimes
we were talking about that just before. Well, I suppose so. I mean, like when you look at American politics and then to what's happening here, I mean, it's virtually unrecognizable, isn't it? It's totally different. So yeah, I suppose
Cool.
I suppose so. Same with Australia. I mean, they're a republic, I suppose, aren't they? The republic, is that what they're called? No. Well, I'm looking at a politician across the table. He's shaking his head. Whatever they're called.
So they are a constitutional monarchy like us.
Thank you.
So
for the moment, for the time being.
And the Honourable Scott Simpson is here.
We might as well bring him to the conversation, right? So, Mr. Scott Simpson, good evening.
Good day, Leo. Nice to see you. Good to be with you guys too.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks for coming. So let's not lose the segue.
Tell us a little bit more. How come Australia has states then, if they're the same sort of...
well, that's a federal. They have a federal system, so they've got that. So that
was the word I was trying to find.
Yeah, so they have states, but the Queen is still their head of state, as she is in New Zealand. And sooner or later, there will probably be a big debate about whether that constitutional arrangement is still appropriate for us, and that debate, I think, will probably occur at a discrete time after the current Queen is no longer with us.
Would that be a referendum involved with something like that?
Oh, I would think.
By discreet, you mean?
Oh, no. But what I meant was you'd want to have that conversation after an appropriate time.
Okay. Yeah. Not the day after.
Not the day after. Yeah. No, not the day after. Because I think actually the Queen has been a very big part of my life for my entire life, and for most of us, she's been a stable rock. And we can talk a little bit later about the merits of a republic or a constitutional monarchy of the sort that we have now. That would be a good conversation to have, because I think as a nation, sooner or later, we will have that conversation, and that'll be a healthy thing. And if we want to change our constitutional arrangements, I would absolutely say we would need to have a referendum. I think that would be the right way to do it.
So, you go.
I was just saying it'd be good to know about it before it pops up. That's all.
What are the main powers that they still hold over New Zealand and Australia then? If it is more of a name than actually an actual thing, like does it come to like last words, or some decisions are actually made by the Crown? How does those dynamics work? Well,
in theory, the Queen is our head of state. She is represented in New Zealand by her Governor-General, and Dame Cindy Caro is our current Governor-General. She's only been in the job for less than 12 months, I think, but she constitutionally represents the Queen. Now, all our laws that we pass in Parliament actually don't become law until the Governor-General has signed them off. And so that's the kind of...
So it is a lot of power.
Yeah, it is a lot of power. And I'm old enough to remember when I was still a school kid, the Governor-General of Australia actually dissolved a parliament, a government in Australia. Gough Whitlam was chucked out of office by the Governor-General. I think his name was Kerr, and he actually dissolved the parliament. Now, that was a very big decision back then. I think it was in the 1970s.
And what an extreme time then if that's happening, right?
Yeah, well, that's right. So, but one of the good things about the way we operate now is that it's the New Zealand government of the day that selects the person who will become our Governor-General. So we do kind of have our own involvement and our own input. And I actually think we've been well served by recent Governors-General, in my view. I think they've all done a pretty good job. One of the good things about having a Governor-General rather than a president, which is probably what we would have if we were a republic, is that the Governor-General doesn't want to do very much. You know, they do the ceremonial stuff, they do the signing of legislation, they do the investitures when local citizens, worthy citizens, get royal honours and things like that, and we do that a couple of times a year with Queen's Birthday honours and also New Year's honours, and that's all nice. And Brett, when you become a knight, you'll get tapped on the shoulder.
I could only hope that would be the greatest day of my... No, it wouldn't.
Sir Brett.
I've got 4 kids.
I'm going to start calling you Sir Brett just because.
That'd be pretty amazing. Do they have veto power? Or the Governor-General?
Well, I think technically they do, but I don't recall it having been exercised in New Zealand in, a long time. Okay. I think the last time that a Governor-General actually acted in the way that you're kind of talking about was that case in Australia back in the 1970s. And that was incredibly controversial at the time. Like really, I mean, it was a huge drama.
That's
at the time.
super interesting though, because I think we're going to learn a lot about New Zealand politics tonight, because I never knew any of that.
Interesting
at all.
Do they get paid as a normal, like not normal, but like as a high profile politician would?
The Governor-General does get paid. I don't know what the amount of money is off the top of my head, but it's a matter of public record, I think. So that's easy enough to find out.
And check out.
Yeah. So it's very transparent, and the term is, I think, 5 years from memory.
Right.
It's unusual for a Governor-General to do more than 5 years. There have been a couple of occasions when it's gone for 6 years or something like that, but usually 5 years, I think that's about right as well.
Cool. Scott, you've been our MP since 2011.
That's
Is that
right.
correct?
Yeah, time's gone quickly.
Yeah, man. And you're looking good. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, man. Usually people are in power and they start to decay. I think you're doing all right.
I found a photograph recently that was taken when I first became an MP, and my hair has changed colour.
Oh, yeah?
Quite a bit.
Oh,
That's a common thing, I think.
At least you still have hair. Let's not talk about hair, okay?
No. I haven't got the Chris Luxon haircut.
Oh yeah, so maybe we can talk about that later. I'm a little bit better than him, but I'm getting there. Just so our audience, because I think this is a question that I have and probably a lot of people in the audience would have. What does a MP do?
Okay. That's a very good question. So there isn't a job description. There is no
it's a free-for-all.
Yeah, well, I tell you what, an interesting thing is members of Parliament are amongst only a very small number of New Zealanders who don't have employment agreements or contracts.
Anarchy.
Anarchy, did you say? Wow, 120 that don't have employment agreements. But so members of Parliament are elected once every 3 years, and they serve their term. So I kind of describe what a member of Parliament does as being like two orbits. So one is the orbit that is local, that is the stuff that happens here in the beautiful Coromandel electorate, and it's a wide geographic area. It's an area that doesn't just include the peninsula, but it's the whole of the Hauraki Gulf, the Auckland side of the Firth of Thames, Kaiawa, Miranda. Some of you, well, I don't know whether you do know where the Red Fox Tavern is, but that's in. Look, I can see a glimmer of recognition in your eye. Yeah, well, there you go. So the Red Fox Tavern side of Maramarua is in the Coromandel electorate, and where the fire station and the school at Maramarua, that boundary is on the other side. That is in the Port Waikato electorate of my friend and colleague Andrew Bailey. And so those are the boundaries. And whole of the Hauraki Plains, and then all the way down on the peninsula coast, all the way down practically to Tauranga. So Waihi Beach, Katikati, Athenry, Mokoroa, all part of the Coromandel electorate. And that's very much Western Bay of Plenty. So the stuff that an MP does that is happening in that orbit is matters. People might have issues that they need to talk to their MP about. Maybe they're having a war with a government department. Maybe the Ministry of
Council,
Social.
you mean?
No, the government department. So could be any of them. The Health, Ministry of Health, Justice, Education. Any, because people sometimes do have issues that are happening in their life, and they might want to come and talk to their MP about that. And maybe I can help them work through those issues with the government department or agency. Oftentimes people may have an issue with the local council or an issue with roads or whatever, so they want to come and talk to me about that. But then there are all the wonderful community groups that we have in the area that I like to try and support, many of which are made up of wonderful volunteers. Here in Whitianga and in Mercury Bay, we've got wonderful organisations, many of them volunteer based and literally could not operate if it wasn't for wonderful volunteers. So I like to support them. Volunteer fire brigades, for instance, search and rescue, Coast Guard, all those sorts of people do wonderful work in our communities. And then there are all the social issues that are of concern. People want to know that the schools are being well maintained, that roads are being well maintained, that bridges are being built. Not enough of them in our area.
That's on
your
my
list. So stuff like that. So that's kind of one orbit, if I can put it that way. And then there's the stuff that happens down in Wellington, and that's another orbit. So that's where members of Parliament gather to literally make the laws of the land. And when we are not arguing with each other in the Parliament, which happens from time to time, where the work of Parliament is to pass laws and make legislation that people in New Zealand live by and work by and operate by. And that is sometimes contentious, but often there is agreement as well. So on some subjects, we're not all hammer and tongs at each other. We are actually kind of working in what they call a bipartisan way. So that happens quite often, but in some areas, very contentious, and that does split often along party lines.
So we want to ask about that after this, though. So you as a local MP for the Coromandel area, when you say you got your finger on the pulse, I suppose, of all these things that are going on. You're trying to, yeah. How do you influence in these decisions? So when someone comes to you with an issue and says, "I've got an issue with whatever it is, the health system or whatever you might be talking about," what would actually be your process? Can you go straight to the local place and talk to them and they go, "Oh shit, it's Scott Simpson, I better listen to what he's got to say"? Or do you have to go through and talk to the representatives or whoever that are in Parliament to try and get things done? Not saying you've got power, but I mean, how like, say I asked you about the bridges, for example, like, how could you actually help with that?
Yeah,
is what I'm asking.
Okay,
yeah.
So you're talking about one-way bridges that we need to be rid of around the peninsula?
Yeah, say that. Like, could you give us a real life example of how
that has been an ongoing issue for decades, not just recently. It's been going on for a long time.
I don't mind them myself, but yeah.
Well, but for people who visit us at peak times, holiday times, those bridges are a real problem. Because most of the year, we locals can actually negotiate them and manage them okay. Doesn't mean we shouldn't fix them. We absolutely blooming well should fix them. Yeah. But the real problem comes at the peak time when we have long weekends, summer breaks and what have you, and we get the big build-up of traffic. And the real problem is when you've got big volumes of traffic going both ways. If the whole peninsula is just emptying out, it's not such a problem. And if the whole peninsula is filling up, it's not just a problem. But boy, when you've got the same number of big volume traffic going both ways, that's when we do have a problem. So what I try to do, and so far it's been ongoing now for my entire time in Parliament, is to engage with the at a political level with the Minister of the day, so the Minister of Transport, the person who has ultimate responsibility for what NZTA does, the Transport Agency does, and then I also try and engage with the Transport Agency themselves, with NZTA. But they have a set of criteria and they just keep coming back and saying, oh, well, those bridges don't fit our criteria. One of the things that really irritates me is that one of their measurement criteria is the number of fatalities. And I just think that's wrong. I just think that's a really bad measure because perversely, if we had more fatalities on those bridges, we'd get them fixed sooner. And I just think that's a really poor quality metric to use for trying to determine whether public infrastructure is renewed or replaced.
So there's no relationship maybe when you see development being so big and such a big thing, especially during the pandemic, a lot of people moving to our areas and we can see the prices going up and everything going up, but then the infrastructure around the place, it doesn't seem to follow that up. How does that talk?
Well, it's a very good question, Leo, because further south in the electorate, around Aotearoa in the Bay of Plenty, there has been even more development than we've had here in Whirianga and Mercury Bay and around the top end of the peninsula. So down that way, the number of houses, and I don't know whether last time you stopped in, if you're driving to Tauranga, take a 10 or 15 minute diversion and head off to Aotearoa. You will be astounded at the number of new homes and the number of people that are now living there. But the road between Aotearoa and Tauranga is frankly one of the most dangerous pieces of road in the country, bar none. The intersection at Aotearoa onto State Highway 2 is hopelessly inadequate. And fortunately, the government, after years of waiting, has now allocated something like $38 million to improve the roundabout. But you're right. The short answer is that there appears to be little or no correlation between rapid intensification of housing and people versus the roading infrastructure that's needed to maintain that. And that's a real misconnect in my view that needs much better planning and addressing.
So do you essentially have to try and just convince the right people?
Got to do a sell job.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes that's easier than other times. So in many cases, I will be advocating on behalf of a single person, a citizen who might have a drama with Inland Revenue or the Ministry of Health or Education or whatever, and they've got an issue that's going on. And oftentimes what I find as a Member of Parliament is that I can sometimes cut through some of the bureaucracy, maybe get past the 0800 call centre for them, because that can be incredibly frustrating for many people who might be wanting to engage with a government department, but they have to spend what seems like an eternity hanging on a phone waiting for someone in the call centre to pick it up.
Just to get to the wrong department.
So sometimes I've got an ability to sort of cut through that, and also to operate at a political level. Like members of Parliament can't, and nor should they, be able to tell public servants how to do their job. So I can't. If you come to me, Brett, and say Leo's a very bad person, I think he should be arrested, I can't ring up the local police station here in Whitianga and say, go and arrest Leo. I shouldn't, and that's right. I shouldn't have to, that's not my job. Those people are employed to do the work that they're employed to do. And similarly, Leo, if you come to me and say, I need a new hip operation, I can't ring up the local hospital and say, hospital, give Leo a new hip. I can't do that. But what I can do is go to the Minister of Health and say, Leo's been waiting a year for his hip. He needs the operation. You're the Minister of Health. What are you doing about it? Right. What's the problem? So you get the difference between operating at a sort of a political level versus an operational level.
And are they generally obligated to like converse with you?
Oh, yeah. So they will always respond, but I might not get the answer I want. So they will always engage. Usually, and this might sound a bit old-fashioned, but snail mail letters are still a thing in politics.
Because got to keep New Zealand Post going, I suppose, somehow.
But I actually find this is a weird thing. These days we all get so much email, so much electronic communication, so many notifications on our phones and our devices. I've sort of gone back to old-fashioned snail mail letters, partly because if you send a letter, first of all, it's a bit unusual these days, but secondly, if you've got a letter in your hot little hand, you've kind of got to do something with it. It's just a bit more meaningful than just another line in an email feed that by lunchtime there are another 10 emails above it, and then by going home time there are 20 emails above it, and by tomorrow morning it's off the screen completely, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
We touched on subjects as examples, but I think they were great subjects to bring to the table, especially when we were talking about the development and what the place is and what it used to be, because you've been around, right? You were not born here, but you've been coming to the Coromandel quite often for a long time. Is that correct?
Well, my family, the Simpsons, on my father's side, there are a very big number of Simpsons up around here, around Whitianga, Mercury Bay, Kūaotunu, Wharekaho, Simpsons Beach, of course. And so my father was one of 8 children, and my grandfather was one of 8. In fact, the original Simpson home is still at Kūaotunu. It's a white cottage, no longer in the family, but my great-grandparents came to Kūaotunu in the late 1800s and set about raising their family there. They had, as I say, 8 children. My grandfather was one of those. And then my extended Simpson family is very numerous. If you can imagine, in times gone by, long winter nights here on the Coromandel, no television, big families. So that's kind of what happened. And there are still an awful lot of Simpsons around this part of the peninsula, and that kind of helps during election time. It's kind of handy. I can remember my first election. We thought it was a very big kick. Well, I got a big kick out of it. I know some of my family members did, to have a Simpson sign on the Simpson farm at Simpson's Beach. We thought that was kind of novel, kind of nice.
There is that's cool. I didn't know about that. So there you go. But the reason why I was going there, Simpson's Beach, Wharekaho, has a new development going on there. There's a lot of houses selling there. And I like to bring this topic up because different people coming from different backgrounds have different views on it. And we've heard things kind of like, you won't find public homes there, or it won't happen because it's about the lifestyle in the Coromandel. People who are living here, like they have more money to spare, but at the same time, we know that there's a lot of traditional families here who not necessarily are rich, and then there's always this thing with like, why is it so easy to get, well, I don't know how easy, but we can see it, right? I've been here for 9 years, so I can see development happening around here, but we don't see affordable home stock. We don't see more of those things. What's the thing there? What's the connection between one thing being approved and other ones kind of like being on the back foot?
We've got a very big shortage around the Coromandel electorate of what some people would simply call social housing. One of the issues that I have to deal with very regularly are people who can't find a place to live, and that problem has got much worse in the last few years than ever it was before. It's always been difficult, but it's far worse now. So that is a real challenge. And that whole issue of housing affordability is not unique to Whirianga. It's not unique to the Coromandel. It's pretty much nationwide. And you're right, Leo, in this part of the world, we've got some very beautiful views, very desirable communities, a very attractive lifestyle, and so people will sort of are attracted to that, and they will come, and then the kind of property developments that occur tend to be those that will meet the market, and the market is usually at the upper and top end. I don't have an instant solution to that other than we need more houses. I'm a bit of a free marketeer. I think that the old rules about supply and demand are actually really important when it comes to housing. And if you have a very large demand and not much supply, prices go up. If you have a lot of supply and less demand, prices drop down. So there is an element of a basic economics involved, but we've got a very big job ahead of us as a country to actually resolve some of those issues. And, I don't want to talk about specifics other than many of the most challenging cases that I deal with as an MP are around housing and finding housing for people who are, in many cases, often a family, and there will be two adults. They'll both be working. They may not be on high incomes, and they might have 2 or 3 school-age children. That is a big struggle, not just in the housing, but in the cost of living and the taxation rates and transport costs, all those sorts of things. Usually it's not just one thing. It's not just housing. There are multiple layers to the issues that confront what sometimes we call the squeezed middle, those sort of people who are in jobs, working hard, but finding it really hard to get ahead.
And that's a lot of New Zealand, right?
That's a lot of New Zealand.
I mean, I'm in that. Like, I work and my wife works, and we've got kids for Africa. I got a funny story. I was talking to my wife yesterday, and I said,
it's good that you talk.
Yeah, I said to her, I was reading online that Scott Simpson is a genie, and she's like, well, what do you mean by that? And I was just like, he's like a literal genie. And she's just like, I don't follow you, which why would she?
No, nor do I.
And I said, well, what does a genie do? And she goes, grants wishes.
Well, there is a bit of a story about that.
Do you want to fill us in on that?
Well, I can fill you in, because people who are tuned into the podcast and watching this won't know, but for most of my life before going to Parliament, I was working in corporates and businesses and things like that. And like a whole lot of other people, sometimes you get to a point in your life where you start making some life changes because circumstances change. And in my case, my children were young adults by this stage. I was running a New Zealand division of an Australian-owned company called Caroma. Caroma make bathroom wear. You probably use Caroma products several times a day. Mm-hmm. And I was reporting to my Australian bosses once a month about how many Caroma products had been sold in New Zealand. Good business, nothing wrong with it, all that sort of stuff. And an opportunity came up for me to make a change in my life, and I wanted to do something other than that. And so Caroma had a charitable relationship with an organisation called Make a Wish.
Oh, thank goodness! Because for a second, when you said you didn't know where I was going, I thought,
it's a long story.
Did I misread
it's a long
that?
Story.
And then I did a whole big intro to it, and it was going nowhere.
Long story short, I ended up being the chief executive of a wonderful children's charity called Make a Wish. And Make a Wish, some of you will know about it. They literally grant wishes to children who have life-threatening medical conditions. Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful charity. Wonderful job that I had there for about 2 or 3 years. Really enjoyed it. Wasn't the biggest paying job, wasn't the biggest number of staff, wasn't the biggest team, all that sort of stuff, but on a personal fulfillment level, it was off the Richter scale. And so, yeah, for a period of time, I was literally a professional wish granter. So that was pretty cool.
They call it a genie in the industry, but that's right.
There you go.
Do you spend more time in Wellington or in the Coromandel? How is...
Yeah, it's probably about 50-50. So Parliament sits for 30-something weeks a year. And when Parliament's sitting, I go to Wellington usually on a Monday evening. I drive my little EV from Thames usually to Auckland, fly out of Auckland on the last flight on a Monday evening, and then we have Tuesday, Wednesday and Thursday in Parliament doing that parliamentary orbit, come home on a Thursday evening, pick my car up, drive back to Thames, and then I have Friday, Saturday, Sunday and most of Monday in and around the electorate. So that's kind of the routine.
So it's going like this since you started being MP for 11 years, pretty much.
Yeah, there is a bit of a pattern to it, and you do get into a kind of a rhythm. But because the electorate's quite big, I try and move around the electorate as sort of on a bit of a cycle as well. So spend time in each of those communities, because each of those communities is different. Whitianga is way different to Pairoa, and Pairoa is way different to Katikati, and Katikati is way different to Waihi Beach, and Waihi Beach is different to Colville. They're all different communities. They've all got their different opportunities and different challenges.
I'm a big Wellington fan. I don't go as often as I would like to, but just the music, the way that people behave there really suits me. I end up going more often to Auckland if I want to enjoy some live music or something. But nowadays we're getting a lot of news from Auckland of how violent it is, of what's happening there. Is it the same in Wellington?
Look, Wellington, I think, has its fair share of problems, just like every part of the country does. But Auckland is particularly bad at the moment. But we've had our fair share of problems here, right in the Coromandel. We've had ram raids in Thames. We had ram raids here in Whitianga. So this is part of, I think, a basic crime wave that is kind of sweeping the country at the moment, and that is a real challenge for us all.
Where do you see the root of the crime?
Oh, that's a very big question. How long is this podcast going for?
We got time.
I think it's a really big problem. But I'm older than you guys, and in my lifetime, I think, and I'm generalising now, but I think we have seen a deterioration in respect for law and order. I think we have seen a deterioration in terms of respect for institutions. I see the way that police officers are treated these days, and I just think, well, who'd be a cop? I mean, it's a really tough job because they have to put up with an awful lot of shite from an awful lot of people, and actually I take my hat off to them because I think they do a terrific job under really difficult circumstances. But we've seen the same breakdown of respect. If I think back to the days when I was a school kid, and I see now the way some teachers are treated by pupils in schools, I wouldn't have the patience or the perseverance or the personality to be a teacher. And I take my hat off to people who are. And
you can't hit them anymore like you used to.
Well, they still used to do that when I was at school. Now that clearly that was we've evolved to a better state. But as I say, I think we've lost something of the respect for institutions, and I think there has been a general deterioration in that, and so there's no one single cause. I think that the way society interacts with individuals and ourselves, that's all changed. The influence of social media, television, we're a whole lot more aware of many other drivers in our day-to-day lives. We've got a much bigger challenges than probably we used to have when times were, for want of a better terms, simpler times.
Coming from where I'm from gives me a little bit of leverage there to see the social gap being a big issue. So in my view, again, I've been in New Zealand for 9 years, so I can only speak for this amount of time. And by listening to friends and people who I live with, I would say that the social gap and the stretch of that social gap, it feeds a lot of crime. And sometimes I see the point with the police. I understand that, but the police is also the people. You know, like they're also the people, and sometimes they're struggling as much as the criminals. And I always see this sad scenario of the criminals being the people and the police being the people, and they have to clash when actually it doesn't feel like there's a fairness there. Do you think that something that is related, because you didn't mention something like with just wealth and social gap being an element there?
Yeah, I understand the point you're making, Leo, but I am not sure that that connection between social inequity and being a lawbreaker is necessarily a given. There are plenty of people, and not just in New Zealand but around the world, who have very low incomes, who have social deprivation, a whole range of things, but they're not criminals. And so, yes, there may be an element of that, but I don't think we can use that as a broad justification for criminality and lawlessness. So, but I understand the point you are making. One of the things that troubles me most is when I've been to visit and talk with some of the shopkeepers who have been the victim of ram raids. And there's one in Thames, Jaswinder Singh at the Martina Four Square in Thames. His Four Square shop had been ram raided 3 times in 3 months.
Jeez.
And he's got very sophisticated CCTV cameras and all that sort of stuff. And he was showing me the CCTV footage. And these ram raids occur very quickly, and you can see it all. But the most frustrating thing from his point of view was that they didn't come in to steal things. It was about capturing it on their own devices, getting the video, getting the social media stuff, and then sharing it for sort of peer group gratification amongst a group of young people who were doing it for the sort of as I say, the peer group gratification. That's probably the best way I can put
that's it. That's true, yeah. I never would have.
Have you seen any? Have you seen any on social media and stuff?
No. I think it's usually closed groups and things like that.
Right.
And so, and then talking to police, they tell me the same kind of thing, that the motivation often is not actually theft. It's just it's sort of one-upmanship.
That's so bizarre.
I think it's really. I
don't know if I feel better about that or worse about that.
Well, I feel worse about it because I think that the point you were making, Leo, about potentially some kind of moral justification for theft, maybe to steal food or something like that, that is a different moral justification, because I don't think there is any justification for simply doing it for kicks. And I think that's an appalling situation. But, I'm told and I understand that's quite common.
National has a different approach from Labour when it comes to gangs. Can you take me through a little bit of that? It's just something that I read not as much as I should, but because of the shootings in Auckland, there were some big changes happening in the month or so. Would National take a different approach to gangs if National would come to power?
That's right. So we would, and I think we would. It's fair to say we would take a much firmer line on gangs. Gangs are criminal groupings. They operate often very sophisticated, organised crime, much of it relating to drugs, bad drugs, meth, P, all those sorts of things, and then the associated impacts of those on people's lives, on criminality, on money, and all that sort of thing. These guys don't drive around on very, very expensive motorbikes because they're on social welfare. There is a very sophisticated level of organised crime behind gangs, and we'd take a much firmer view. So we would want to, for instance, effectively disrupt their operations as much as we could, because we think a soft on crime approach isn't working, hasn't worked, and we think that very clearly the attitude that comes sort of from the top pervades all aspects of society and gang organisation. So if you have a society that kind of accepts and tolerates gang behaviour, then gang behaviour will proliferate. And we've had some terrible situations in the not too distant past. There was a guy that was just driving along that Hamilton Auckland highway a few months ago that literally got beaten up to within an inch of his life, just an innocent citizen by a group of gang members. That kind of lawlessness should not happen. So we take a different view. We think that actually gangs need to be monitored far more carefully and more closely than they are, and in a way that disrupts their activities. And so that's one of the things that we would want to do should we be given the opportunity to be in government again.
I see the point clearly, and I always like to go back to that point of the social thing because I work with the kids. And you know, it's a small community that sometimes doesn't offer as many opportunities as you would expect as a community to engage with the children. And I see the thing with the sense of belonging. You know, that sometimes in a society where consumerism really leads the game, so it's all about being. That's why, you know, and I'm going to go back again to the lifestyle. When you offer a lifestyle that only a few can have, you're creating a lot of anxiety on the ones who cannot have, you know. So I like to point that what I see is that some of those kids, they join the gangs and they see an opportunity to belong, to be part of the group.
I think that's a big part of it.
That's why when I hear people saying, oh, we got to tackle them, we got to tackle the crime, I'm like, I feel like it's an approach, but it's an approach that a lot of people will get hurt unnecessarily because you're trying to get rid of a problem, but by default, you're going to create more anger because those kids will be looking at, oh, they're beating up dad. He's selling drugs, but he's feeding the family. You know, like it's the perspective of the child, and then you have another hater of the police. So I understand how hard the job is, but I'm always interested to see like how deep the solving of the problem can be. And we were talking about the time you have, right? When you're running for 3-6 years, like how much can you do? You know, there's another thing that we could probably jump in of like, you know, one government is doing their job and they have an approach, but then you have the other government saying that's not the best approach. And then you guys get into power and then everything that was done, it's out of the equation. And then we're going to start new. And again, I go back to the child looking at everything. It's like, oh man, I don't know what's going on here. So,
but isn't that a much bigger question about the whole role of society? And when a young person sees a gang as being a better option than their family or our wider community, we've got a really big problem. And you know, I understand where you're coming from, but that doesn't mean that we should then make excuses for lawlessness and criminal activity, because that's essentially what we do. And if we allow that to occur, essentially we have anarchy, and that's ultimately far worse in my view. So I'm always concerned about the victims, and I don't think we should lose sight of the bad stuff that happens and the victims and the impact that has on their lives. So we, for instance, wouldn't be giving gangs money, taxpayer money, as has happened recently, $2.5 million. You know, we think that is fundamentally sending the wrong messages about how society.
What was the money for?
Oh, it was for a drug rehab. It came from the proceeds of crime. It was kind of like a Ponzi fund, a government Ponzi fund in some respects. And I use that term with a smile on my face because there is a thing called the Proceeds of Crime Act, where money that is retrieved from a crime gets put back into the pot.
So like a drug bust or something, they've discovered the 100 grand in cash or something.
And then that money then gets used, in theory, to help halt crime or change behaviours. And what happened was that a whole lot of that money went, that some of it would have come from gang activity, ended up going back to gang activity.
But for rehabilitation, right?
Yeah. So that's kind of the way it went.
There's one question about the gangs. Yeah. I don't know no one in a gang or.
Good.
But when you say that all the gangs are bad, like I'm pretty sure there is good people inside gangs, right? Like sometimes you're just born in a wrong family. You know, I don't know. Sometimes you just end up there for whatever reason, or sometimes I even believe, did some people didn't make gangs because they disagree of the other gangs, kind that being the opposite of it, you know, like, not that I understand all the thing of like guys with motorbicycles and pets on the back and being the macho, you know, like I understand all these things, but when you say that all the gangs are criminals, it's kind of a big statement.
Well, it means what it means is you have to define what a gang is, I guess, and there are all kinds of gangs in our society, but I'm talking about the criminal gangs, and I'm not one that is going to be happy making excuses for their behaviour. And so I do think that we have the rule of law for a reason, and the vast majority of citizens can and do live their lives peacefully and without being criminals. And I just don't think that it's good to make excuses for what is essentially lawless criminal behaviour. Can I give you a story that...
Can I just ask you a question before your story? What do you think it should be done with that money that was given for rehabilitation for gang members? What would be your take?
Well, it was a drug program run by the gang.
But to get people out of it,
in theory. Anyway,
but the government would be supervising that, right?
Well, one would hope, but as I say, I think the principle of that was flawed.
Yep.
And I think many New Zealanders would have felt exactly the same way.
Yep.
So I like the idea that the proceeds of criminal activity are confiscated and returned to the Crown, but I'd like to make sure that there was a much better justification and appropriate reallocation of that money. I think quite a lot of it should go to victims, actually. So there you go. So there will always be questions about where the money comes from, where it goes, but I think it's obvious that when the proceeds of crime are repatriated back to the state, then there should be careful governance over where that money goes, and I just think sending it back to programs run by the gangs, I think that's kind of crazy.
I can see the irony in it. Like, you can see how people could get upset. Well, but I do also understand that like it would be good to help. Even though they are still people, to get them off drugs, if that's where the money did go, like you say, if it was supervised and it was seen that that's where.
But on the one hand, they're busy peddling the drugs. That's
I'm not a fan of gangs.
So like I say, it's kind of a circular. It's kind of a money-go-round.
I don't think none of us here are fans of criminal gangs. But like again, like for me, it's always the idea of like if there's a problem happening there. You should do the best you can. At least the state should do the best it can to eliminate that problem. Not to like punishment comes as a consequence, but like I don't see how much like incarcerating those people, you know, in private companies that are making money on top of that, if you can actually take money from the government to do something that the government is supervising. You know, like I see the point. As you said, we don't know how it would be done. New Zealand seems to be way better than Brazil when it comes to corruption. You know, we don't hear much about it in New Zealand. So I would expect well, as you said, we don't know, right?
The corruption you do hear about is hardly corruption, and sometimes it's quite funny.
Yeah, we don't know. So I like your points, but I also understand when they say that the money should go back. What do you think?
Yeah, I like the idea of it going to victims of, like, if it was drug money specific. Is it drug money specifically, or is it money from crime? Well, it comes from a variety.
It's the money from criminal activity.
Yeah. So if it's from, I understand that going to victims would be a great idea, but I also think like what you're saying of how like if we could say put it into like some sort of social infrastructure to help the children of gang members and crime and stuff like that, to try and stop that progress.
Yeah.
And I'm sure
to break the cycle.
Break
the cycle.
That's I can see sort of both ways, like because of the victims of it obviously deserve as well. I couldn't help on a slight detour. I couldn't help but hear that you said bad drugs. What's your stand on marijuana? How did you vote on that?
And just on a,
I guess that's like, again, that we used this analogy before. It's like beauty; it's in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah,
but you know, some people.
I'm not asking if you partake, but when we had the referendum, do you mind? So this can be a two-part question if it's all right.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, you don't have to answer if you don't want to. But
right.
if you, what way you leaned on that?
I voted in favour of medical marijuana. But I voted against.
Can we put a clap there for Scott?
Yeah.
But I voted against Chloe Swarbrick's plan to essentially decriminalise.
Scott.
So look, how come I haven't got a sound effects button?
Well, yeah, you can ask. He's neutral.
So the thing is, I don't know, Leo. Are you drinking tea or coffee or?
I'm drinking tea.
Okay, but there will be some
caffeine.
No, but there'll be some people who think caffeine is a drug, and there are some people who have alcohol as a.
I think it's an alcohol drug.
Exactly right. Okay. So probably me generalising about what's good and bad is not helpful. But we have a list of drugs categorised conveniently by statute into various classes, and the Class A drugs are sort of the, in inverted commas, bad ones.
Do you want to go on a segue for that?
No, I was. So if you've got something related to that.
just because we're still there, what is the main reason why you see the decriminalization of drugs being a problem?
Because I've got a concern about leading into other drugs. I'm not convinced. Well, here in the Coromandel, we've got a reputation for being a big marijuana growing part of the country, and we kind of do have that. Again, talking to police recently, they tell me that we still have an awful lot of marijuana growing in the peninsula, and my concern is about what that leads to. Over my lifetime, I have had occasion to know people, friends of mine personally, who have been big users of marijuana, and I've actually seen the impacts that it's had on their lives. Oftentimes, they don't recognise those impacts. They think everything's fine, but it's not. And so I'm concerned about the impact of that. But again, I think pretty much anything in excess is going to be bad. And that's what our parents used to tell us.
Yeah, if we have legal alcohol, we may as well have legal marijuana, though, right?
Well,
we're talking to two teetotalers here, so it is a hard thing when you've got one thing which is, in my opinion, almost equally as destructive, alcohol, as marijuana. Where, each to their own, right? Like, if people want to smoke it or vote either way, it's
The reason why I like the debate is because when something is illegal, you cannot even talk about it. So how are you going to educate? Because again, I work with the children, and I was one. When someone says, all of us.
We all.
When someone says, you cannot do this. Wow, it's like, do it. Yeah. So now after listening to like neuroscientists who understand the brain and who I go for when you're looking for a specialist on those subjects, they always say by decriminalizing it means that you open the possibility to study, to talk about them. Meth, whoa, devastating, horrible, right? In Brazil is crack, which is pretty much the same. But what happens there, I don't know how deep it gets in New Zealand, but for example, in Brazil, the guy who sells you weed, he also sells you crack, and crack is way worse than weed if you look at damaging the brain or whatever. So,
and you think that's not the same here?
That can be.
It is the same, right? So
it depends. Some places are just tinny houses, and some places just sell meth.
Anyway, that's what I'm saying. Like, I cannot say, but like,
I
can speak of that example. I believe it's quite similar here. There will be people pushing both, but like in Brazil, there's a lot of drug dealers who don't deal with crack because they know that it's going to ruin the seller. Like they want to keep that seller coming back. And it always hit me. It was like, wow, people go for one thing. Because it's illegal, they cannot get it, they're going to push the other thing. Why can't they have the opportunity to understand what that substance is all about and make a better decision on that? So I get your point, and that's why we're having this great polite conversation, agreeing and disagreeing. But sometimes I see as a lack of opportunity to actually understand more about substances. It's happening with psychedelics nowadays. It's something that we like to bring here to the show. There was a push in the 70s, America doing the war on drugs. The drugs won from what I can see, they didn't solve the problem. And now psychedelics are having this amazing renaissance with dealing with traumas and anxiety, and people studying them. And I always think, wow, imagine how many of them we miss the opportunity of understanding because they're just not legal. I
worry also about opioids. We've got the world has, I think, particularly the Western world has a really big problem with opioids, and so many things that can influence and impact on our health and our well-being and our lives and our society.
Yes. You were on for the same-couple marriage, end-of-life choice, and abortion. Is that correct?
Yeah,
you voted for...
I've got probably in terms of my National Party colleagues, I tend to be on the more liberal side of the National Party, and quite proudly so. So, and remember, the Coromandel is actually quite a conservative electorate. But I think on those moral issues, on what we call conscience issues, what I've discovered is that if you take a position and explain to people what your personal view is, they may not agree, but they will respect your right to have that view. And I've always taken the position that if people don't like my view, well then that's that 3-year thing. The contract is for 3 years, and you can be thrown out. What was interesting was after the end of life choices one, which was very controversial, as you'll remember. And we've got a lot of people in the Coromandel electorate who were very, very opposed to it. I ended up talking to a number of them later that said, look, we don't agree with you, but we respect your decision, and at least we knew where you stood. Don't agree with it, but that's the way our system operates. So, and I think that kind of works. So on the conscience issues, they are usually drugs, sex, alcohol.
I thought you say rock and roll.
Yeah, not quite. but those kinds of issues. And in New Zealand, we don't vote along party lines on those sorts of things, and I think that's quite a healthy thing.
I agree. I wanted to ask about that. I've got it written on my massive list here.
He's got a very long list.
And I've only crossed one thing off, and it was the genie story that I Oh no, I can cross off what does an MP do locally and in Parliament. That's good. I just wanted to know. So we have a lot of news, social media, and stuff like that about American politics, and we have a sort of an idea of how that works, especially like through like even movies and TV series, stuff like that. But so I've got written here, for example, like I wanted to bring it up when we were talking about like the referendums and how you voted on certain conscience subjects. So say, for example, during the pandemic or in general, because they seemed to be different, but correct me if I'm wrong, that like, so in general, when you want to pass a law or a piece of legislation or whatever the terminology is.
You got it, legislation.
Could you, I don't know if I said it right.
No, you said it good.
Could you explain to us how that piece would come about and then how it would be passed, or put up and passed and whatever, and also, for example, in a time of crisis, I'm not sure if it was different during the pandemic, whether those rules became different. So, for example, like during lockdown, things like that, like implementing a lockdown, is that come around the same way as this legislation would come around? Like, could you explain that to us? Because like, as a born in New Zealand Kiwi, I don't exactly know how it works. I know that you guys vote for things sometimes and whatnot, but what would you not vote on, and what would you vote on? What might you not vote on, and how how do you decide on what you're voting on?
Sure.
I'm sure there's like 2,000 things that you guys want to discuss, right?
I mean, that's one of the great things about Parliament is there's lots of stuff happening pretty much all the time, and lots of different pieces of law and legislation happening, simultaneously. So
sorry to ask you these questions.
No,
I've never talked to a politician before, so I'm ready to get through it all at you.
What I often say, Brett, is that the first rule of politics is learn to count. So 120 members of Parliament, myself and 119 others. And so that means if you want to pass something or stop something, you need 61 or more friends to support your position one way or the other. Now, at the moment, the current government has 65 MPs. So pretty much, well, absolutely, they can do whatever they like while they have the numbers. 65 votes, 65 Labour MPs.
Not including anything that they might be affiliated with.
No, so they've got 65 MPs, and then the Greens have some, and New Zealand, they've gone. The Māori Party, Te Pāti Māori, and ACT and National. So ACT, National, Te Pāti Māori and the Greens don't add up to more than 61. So for the foreseeable, until the next election, the Labour Party has an absolute majority. They can pass whatever legislation they like, and they can also stop whatever they like. So if we put up a piece of legislation that we want to have debated and discussed, they will, if they don't like it, they will vote that down just by sheer weight of numbers.
Okay.
So how do political parties make decisions about whether they're going to support a piece of legislation or not? Well, we meet as a group. It's called a caucus. It's we're once a week when we're in Wellington. All the National Party MPs meet in a room, and we will talk about the various pieces of legislation that are coming up for decision.
So you get you'll have a list, and
we'll have a list. We know it's sort of like an agenda. Okay. It's called an order paper. So you know what's coming through the sort of the legislative sausage factory.
And it might have 20 things or something.
So that sort of thing.
Yep.
And there could be sort of half a dozen of them sort of in play at any one time. Okay. And so we will, as a group, decide whether we support it, whether we want some changes, or whether we think it's a good idea or a bad idea or whatever. And then we will have a debate behind closed doors. But when we leave that room, we have come to a consensus group decision and how we will vote as a block.
And do you ever have anyone like you, for example, might you go, well, I disagree with that. I'm going to just be the one person who votes the opposite direction. Yeah, obviously you want to try and stay together.
Yeah, you try and stay together. Yeah. Occasionally, in times gone by, you have one person that might say, "Oh, look, I absolutely can't abide or agree with the group decision," and that's what you would call crossing the floor. That means that you are voting against your party, and that term "crossing the floor" dates back to olden days times when. Before we had MMP, on a contentious vote, you actually used to have to stand up from your seat, and there are two doors. One has a sign that says "aye," and the other one has a sign that says "no," and you would literally walk through to cast your vote, either aye or no.
Sounds fair. You stand up for what you believe.
Yeah, it was a physical thing.
Yeah.
These days, that doesn't happen very often. Surprisingly, it does happen sometimes on those conscience votes I was talking about. Yeah. And having done a few of those, there's something really powerful about physically having to stand up and walk through that door, whereas most times in Parliament under MMP, someone just stands up and says National 35 votes, Labour 65, and they just count the number. It's not nearly as
saves time.
Well, it saves a lot of time, but it's not as powerful in terms of being an active participant in our democracy. There's something very meaningful about the process of standing up and walking through that door into a lobby. And when you go through the door, there's someone on the other side that is got a list of all the names, and they are crossing your name off or ticking your name.
I thought you were going to say they punch you in the stomach and call you a traitor.
No. But as I say, that kind of physical aspect, I think, is actually quite powerful, quite important.
Oh, so anyway, you get your list, and you guys in the caucus, and
that's right.
And you
so we do all that,
decide that, yeah.
And then what happens is that then we have the debate in Parliament. So there will be speakers for and against, and it's broken down proportionally by the number of MPs in the that each party has. So Labour gets more speakers than National because they've got more MPs, and National gets more speaking time than ACT because we've got more than them. So, but it's all proportional, and it's all kind of figured out very mathematically to give everybody the same number of or proportional speaking time, and then you vote. But it always comes back to if it's a piece of government legislation, the government will always vote for it. They've got the numbers. But in previous times, MMP has worked, and this is the whole concept of MMP. It's designed that, in theory, very unusual to have one party having an absolute majority. Usually, a party needs a partner, a coalition, and that is designed to try and bring a greater level of consensus. That was the theory. It doesn't always work that way, but that's the theory.
So,
now you go.
So how is it decided upon which pieces of legislation are brought up to the table?
Okay,
so that's would there not be a lot of them? I'm guessing,
it's the government of the day that basically decides that agenda, that program, if I can put it that way.
So they literally will just go, these are all, like you might write something and be like, here's some and they would just go, oh, sorry mate, and pick. I mean that's how anyone would do it, right? If you're the people.
There is a thing that allows individual MPs like me to bring legislation forward. But it's literally a lottery, and it's called a members' bill. And what happens is that any MP who is not a cabinet minister can have a bill in the ballot, so a piece of legislation in the ballot, and then they will literally. It's quite theatrical. They literally have this old a biscuit tin with marbles in it, numbered marbles, and there might be 80 bills in the ballot, and they will have a ceremony where they a number out, and if your number gets picked out, then your piece of legislation will come up for debate.
And how often does that happen?
Well, it happens, again, it's a bit of a sausage factory. So as one bill gets completed in that process, either passed or lost, it comes to a conclusion one way or the other. As one gets finished, another one gets drawn out, so it kind of fills up the sausage factory again.
Oh, okay.
So so there's a constant feed of what they call members' bills coming through.
And but they would make up a percentage, like, because you're saying that, like, so at the moment Labour would be picking most of the stuff.
The vast majority is
the random lottery one. They go in there as well, right, mixed in with the rest.
Yeah, they have that happens for a relatively small amount of time in the parliamentary calendar.
Okay, so if in the way of a emergency type pandemic scenario. Where they're like, we want to go into a lockdown. Is that just, so that would be the same? They just go...
Very similar, although what happens then, sometimes they have what's called urgency, which means that all the normal sort of timetabling is sort of put to one side, and Parliament will just keep going on one piece of law until it's done. And that can mean sitting until midnight, and then starting again at 9 o'clock the next morning until it's finished. So when we had the initial pandemic, there was some special legislation that was passed that gave the government some power to borrow money, quite a lot of money as it happened, and then also gave them some extra powers. But although we actually did have, there was actually some sort of, the Health Act actually contained quite a lot of power that was used, but some of that was finessed and changed. And for an issue like that, there was parliamentary consensus, and I think from memory, and I'd have to go back and check, but I think pretty much all that stuff was passed unanimously, because I think politicians from all around the Parliament realised that this was a special set of circumstances. It was an unusual event,
unknown as well at the time,
and actually you needed. I mean, we can argue that we as we did argue the detail around that stuff, but I think there was a very broad recognition that this was an unusual set of circumstances that was happening worldwide, and we needed to give the government of the day the power that they needed to act on behalf of the country and the citizens.
That's all very well explained. Obviously, I had one last question.
What's on your
It
list?
Escaped me. Oh, this list. You don't want to know what's on this list.
So I'll take one of mine. You're do you remember what? Because there was probably something related to.
It literally just disappeared.
It's all good.
Yeah. If it comes back up,
ultimately,
I'll bring it back.
ultimately, Parliament is master of its own destiny. Mm-hmm. So if a set of circumstances comes up that is unusual or whatever, then Parliament has the ability to be flexible enough to make its own rules. And of course, Parliament is often referred to as the highest court in the land, and it is.
I remembered now.
Yes.
Does your debating when you in Parliament, does anyone actually change the other people's minds? Do you debate for like a day and then Labour goes, you know what, they've got a point. I think I'm going to change mine, or one of the smaller parties or something.
Usually that doesn't happen, but I have seen it happen on some of those conscience issues. I can remember being in the Parliament, I think when we were debating the marriage equality legislation, and someone who had said all the way along they were going to vote against it, actually changed their mind on the night.
Well, that's good.
So it can happen. Doesn't happen very often, but it can.
I was just curious because it's like all you see on TV, like Parliament TV or something, and it's talking and talking. I was wondering if it comes to. But I mean, at least everyone knows how everyone thinks.
And it shows a lot when you change your mind, right?
Yeah.
It's quite empowering when you realize
absolutely.
something and change your mind. I think that's why we're here for.
All right, hit us, Leo.
You are the spokesperson for climate change.
That's right.
International.
Yep.
The Blue Greens.
The Blue Greens.
That's right. We've got a Blue Greens forum this weekend in Auckland.
How and where do you get the information from? How do you keep yourself updated when it comes to climate change?
A lot of reading, and on climate there is an enormous amount of text from all over the world. And one of the interesting and challenging things is that any discussion on climate rapidly descends into jargon. And a lot of that jargon is not the kind of language that everyday New Zealanders use in their day-to-day conversation. And so it's very easy to get into words and terms and vocabulary that is not easily understood by a lot of people. And one of the jobs that I think that politicians have is trying to kind of demystify the language and the vocabulary and try and make it meaningful and real, because if you don't do that, then you don't take people with you. And politics is, I think, the art of literally taking people with you, because if you don't do that, then that's when you get people sort of going, I'm not going to bloody do that. And so there's a real skill in that. And some politicians are better at that than others, I have to say. It's a craft and it's a gift and it's a skill. It's just like some people are really good concert violinists, and some people are really good athletes, and some people are really good mathematicians. I'm none of those, so I'm a politician.
Do you believe it's real, climate change?
I was going to say, I'll ask the hard question. Yeah.
Of course, absolutely. And we have an opportunity to do what we can, both as individuals, as communities, and as a nation, because we are all on the one planet, and actually we all have an obligation, I think. I'm at the optimistic end of the climate debate. I think that humankind has the wit, intelligence and imagination to actually find the solutions that are required, some of which we don't know yet, but we will in a period of time. So I'm not one of those people who is a defeatist and says, oh, well, the world's just going to end in 12 years' time, we might as well give up. Actually, I'm far more optimistic than that.
So you feel good about being in this position, because like just by looking to the 2-3 last years of like big fires in Australia, like and floods and the food production getting scarce because of all those things very close to us, and then you have this title, man, that is quite a big one to take. Yeah,
it is a big one.
How is the feel? How is the responsibility?
It's actually a sense of privilege and humbleness, actually, both at the same time. I often tell a bit of a story, and if you will indulge me for a minute.
Yep.
I like a good story.
Well, it sort of relates to my family here on the Coromandel. So 100 years ago, my grandfather Simpson and his brothers came back from World War I, and we're farming here on the peninsula, not far from where we are in the studio tonight. And they were farming in those days with a box of matches, literally burning whole hillsides and valleys, and then they would burn the bush, put the cattle in, the cattle would feed on the new growth and what have you. Now, we wouldn't dream of doing that today, but back then, that was the commonly accepted farming practice of the day. It wasn't just my grandfather and his brothers were doing it, all the farmers were doing it, and not just in New Zealand, around the world. And then march on, didn't make him a bad person. March on 50, 60 years, and I can remember as a kid going to visit my uncle and aunt who were dairy farming here on the Coromandel, and they had just built a new milking shed. And the new milking shed, I remember my uncle saying, look, we've built this new milking shed right by the creek so we can flush the muck straight into it. Isn't that fantastic?
Oh, yeah.
Now, you probably remember days like that in other parts on the Hauraki Plains.
Well, yeah, in the Waikato,
and look, we wouldn't dream of doing that today. Didn't mean that my uncle was a bad person or a bad farmer. So march on to today, 2022, the things that sometimes I get really concerned about are what are the things that we're doing today that we take for granted, that we're all doing, that in 50 or 100 years' time, our grandchildren or great-grandchildren are going to look back and say, what were they thinking of in 2022? You know, are they going to say, look, and are my grandchildren going to say, look, Grandfather Scott, best MP the Coromandel ever had, really good guy, but he used to drive around in a vehicle that was fueled by fossil fuels. Didn't mean he was a bad person. They all did it. You know, will they be saying that, or will my great-grandchildren be saying, look, you know, great-grandfather Scott, really good guy, best MP the Coromandel ever had, but he used to buy food that was wrapped in plastic. Didn't make him a bad person, but they were all doing it. So in the role that I'm privileged to have at the moment, I'm thinking about what are the things that we do today that in time to come we will look back on and say that was a really dumb thing to be doing. Probably things that we take for granted, and I don't know what all those things are, but you can bet your bottom dollar there is stuff that we're doing today that future generations will look back on and say that was pretty crazy.
What we're chucking into the atmosphere is definitely one of them. I did actually have something about EVs, but one thing you can probably speak to it actually if you want.
Which one? The green?
Gas,
the gas emissions and stuff. Is that where you're going?
Well, I was going to go more with the mining, but yeah.
Oh, we can touch on both. Yeah. Oh no, because the first question that I would ask it was because you said, oh, what could be a crazy thing in 100 years? So like I'm wondering which ones you think are a big problem, and because I'm already talking, I might as well say my opinion.
Well, please do.
Well,
it's your show.
I did a little bit of research, and it's something that really interests me because I'm on a plant-based diet. I don't eat meats and I don't drink milk, so
and no alcohol.
No, it's been a while. Not really. No, just tea. Coffee every now and then, the drug that I can buy.
Oh, I love coffee.
Anyway, from what I get from like real nowadays, right? But from the New Zealand's greenhouse gas inventory data is that 48.1. This is 2009. I don't know if it's more or less, but that's a pretty good date to check. Agriculture was like responsible for 48% of the emissions, and within that, like dairy cattle 22, and then sheep 12, and then beef cattle. So I would say, like if I were in a position or whatever politician's position, I would be concerned about that. But that's my thing. What is your take? Because I know that there was the big plan with cutting the emissions, and there was something that Greenpeace gave actually a little bit of shit to the government, saying that there was not a great move leaving the farmers to manage their own emissions. So can you take me through a little bit of that? But answering first, what do you think is going to be a bit crazy in a few years?
Oh, well, a couple of those examples. I mean, I just think that fossil fuel driving, for instance, will leave us much quicker than many people think.
What's the percentage on that? It's over there. The cars.
Transport is the next biggest.
20% almost.
I was going to say transport is our next biggest issue after agricultural emissions. But the reason that agriculture is a big thing for us is because we've got an agricultural economy. Essentially, New Zealand is one big farm, and in this part of the farm we have dairy cows, and in this part of the farm we have sheep, and this part of the farm we have beef, in this part of the farm we have horticulture, avocados, kiwi fruit, and in this part of the farm we have maize, and we have and just off the farm we've got aquaculture, and so we have a lot of primary production, a lot of forests, all that sort of stuff. So agricultural emissions are a big challenge for us, and a big part of that is biogenic methane, because we have a lot of cattle. Sheep and cattle are essentially the producers of the biogenic methane. Interestingly enough, and this is going back a bit, but I had the opportunity before our zero carbon legislation came into law. The Environment Select Committee was sent to Europe. This is pre-COVID times, so this is 5 or 6 years ago. And I was fortunate enough to go on that trip. We went to the EU, we went to Brussels to talk to them about their legislative and regulatory framework, what they were doing. And we also went to the United Kingdom and to London and talked to them about their stuff. Everywhere we went, we asked the politicians and the officials and the policy people, what are you doing about agricultural emissions? And the answer was the same everywhere, exactly the same. You'd swear that they had swapped notes. The answer was, well, we've got to get our renewable electricity to a much higher level. We've got to fix our transport. We've got to fix our industrial heat. We've got to fix a whole lot of other stuff. And they would say, by the time we get to agricultural emissions, we hope New Zealand will have solved that for us. And so that was sort of their answer. So no pressure, little old NZ. And the reason that I tell you that story is because actually if we can, as a nation, crack the conundrum that is biogenic methane, we will not just be doing ourselves a favour, but we'll be doing the planet a favour. And I think that's actually cause for optimism, because I think if any country can, probably it's us, because farming is such a big part of what we do. I'm not one who says, and nor is the National Party, that we should simply just cull cows, that just by reducing productivity we will reduce our emissions. Yes, we would. But would we reduce global emissions? Answer no, because what kicks in then is what's referred to as carbon leakage, and the dairy product that we currently export around the world, which, by the way, is produced in New Zealand, if not most efficiently on the planet, very high in terms of carbon efficiency, that product would actually not be not consumed. It's just be produced by countries that are less efficient than we are. And that's the challenge. So actually, it's not just as simple as saying, oh, let's have less methane producing animal, let's have fewer of those. That's just not quite as simple as that. So the argument is also true for aluminium and glass and concrete and steel. Those are some of our largest emitting industries. But if we simply closed New Zealand Steel down, we're still going to need steel in our economy. So what we would be doing potentially is just importing steel from less environmentally efficient plants than the one at Glenbrook or the concrete place up north and so forth. So this is not a binary kind of solution. That it has to be nuanced and it has to be pragmatic and sensible. So that's the kind of view that we would take. So I think we've got an enormous challenge, but also an enormous opportunity actually to do the planet a favour by solving the conundrum that is biogenic methane. And there won't be just one silver bullet. There won't be one magic bullet. It'll be a range of things.
One thing that concerns me a little bit when it comes to that subject is that a lot of people ignore the joker, the card that could change things, is the high-tech food. You know, it's already happening. Yeah. Like a lot of people say, oh, that's not natural. And I'm like, welcome to McDonald's. You know, like what is natural about that? 30 years ago, no one would say that we would have this amount of processed food in our shelves, and it's just happening. And people probably would laugh when you would say, oh yeah, we're gonna have food that is gonna last forever. So not trying to be pessimist, completely the opposite. That's the reason why we're doing this show, because we want to have conversations that will actually make our lives better. But I understand this high-tech foods being produced in dairy, alternatives being produced with like a tenth or even less, with a fraction of the footprints to the environment. And it seems to me that there's not much talk about a shift that could be done. Let's say that suddenly it hits the market and that's it. We're going to produce milk in the laboratory and it's cheap as and everybody drinks and it's actually okay. It's like plant-based food. Everybody gives shit to it, but they eat it and they're like, this is actually fine. And then suddenly we end up with this amount of cows. And like, I was just wondering about any transition or any support that could be coming. Like, what could we also do with this land? Can we start growing something else? Is there anything that is already happening? We mentioned the film Milked because the director was here and she put some of farmers who are starting to grow other things in their lands. But like, do you see any of these happening?
Yeah, absolutely. I can remember hearing a presentation some years ago from Sir Peter Gluckman. He was at that stage the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor. And I remember him saying that the biggest threat to the New Zealand economy was actually synthetic milk and synthetic meat. Because
how many years ago?
Oh, this was 5 or 6 years ago, something like that. He was John Key's Chief Science Advisor. And he was quite adamant that was the biggest threat to the new prosperity and well-being of the New Zealand economy in years to come. But the point that you've made, Leo, about change in the way that we farm, change in land use, change in technology, change in human diet, those are all factors. And actually that's been happening since Adam and Eve, since Eve bit the apple. I mean, things have
religious guy.
Well, there you go. Well, it's just an analogy, but you know what I mean. Behaviour has changed literally throughout human time. Let me give you an example. When I was a kid, all around the top of the South Island, around Blenheim and Marlborough through there, wall-to-wall sheep country. In fact, a former colleague of mine, Nick Smith, used to tell the story of how when he first became an MP 30 years ago, he was getting complaints from the sheep farmers up around Marlborough and Blenheim saying, all these crazy grape growers want to change good sheep country and they want to plant grapes. It's madness and we've got to stop it. But of course, now we are growing some of the best wine grapes in the world, bar none, on land that only a few decades ago was wall-to-wall sheep. Similarly, if you go down to the southern part of the Coromandel electorate, down around the Western Bay of Plenty, Katikati, Athenry, all through there, when I was a kid, sheep and beef country, wall-to-wall. Nowadays, kiwi fruit, avocado, that's all over the place. And in fact, if you had said then that this would all be avocado and kiwi fruit, they would have carted you away in a straitjacket because people couldn't imagine it. So land use changes, diets change, technology change, people's tastes change, and that will always be the way. The great challenge for us in New Zealand, a small nation at the bottom of the South Pacific, is our ability to be nimble enough to adapt and change to changing demand, changing pricing, changed land use, changed signalling, all those sorts of things. I'm like you at the optimistic end. I know personally I'm not eating a complete plant-based diet, but I'm eating less meat than I did a few years ago. It's not no meat, but it's less meat, and I think an awful lot of New Zealanders are doing the same.
Except for me.
Except from Brett doing the
carnivorous.
I'm doing some sort of carnivore diet at the moment.
We need the balance here. We need the yin yang, Scott. That's why Brett said, I get you, man.
There will be. I mean, I listened to a fellow, Pablo, I've forgotten his surname, but he's Argentinian. He's a professor down at Lincoln University. And he talks with great passion about the role of meat in our diet and the role of grass-fed meat particularly. He's a very passionate man. He has a different view to yours, but it'll be just as valid, just as intelligent, and just as well thought out.
Oh, sounds like a great guy.
He's a good guy.
I feel like we've definitely got to go, since we're in the Coromandel, we need to talk about mining. And also I've got written on my list here about gas and oil in New Zealand as well.
Do you have a question about mining? Because I have that comment that I heard.
Well,
from...
you can hit the question about mining if you like, since you've got one specifically.
No,
absolutely. But I just want to just preface it with, what's with the gas and oil in New Zealand at the moment? Do we produce any of our own?
Yep.
And we do. Yep. And is that a good thing or is it a bad thing in your opinion? I'm of no opinion either way.
Yeah,
I'm not ready for drilling of any sort, honestly, but at the same time, we've got to get our shit from somewhere, right?
Well, I think that sort of sums it up, is that if we weren't producing our own oil and gas, we'd be importing it. And actually we import an awful lot of now refined fossil fuel because the refinery company at Marsden Point has closed down, and so all our refined avgas, petrol, diesel, all that sort of stuff now being imported in a refined state.
Okay.
And we're going to need that for some foreseeable time yet, because even though I'm a great fan of EVs and I've driven my little car, my 100% electric Kona, Hyundai Kona EV, now done 115,000 kilometres, no petrol, it's parked outside, just love it, best little car I've ever had. Most people are still driving fossil fuel cars. Over a period of time that will change, but we're going to need fossil fuel for some considerable time yet. So I would prefer that we used our own rather than be reliant on international markets and importing it. So we do have some oil and some natural gas on land. The offshore stuff around Taranaki in particular is rapidly coming to an end. That's the Maui field. Okay. And the current government has banned further exploration offshore. Happy to have exploration onshore, so that's proceeding, but they've banned the offshore stuff.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I'm not a great fan of that. And in fact, National has said that we will reverse that decision on the basis that gas, in particular, is a transition energy source. It's it's still a fossil fuel, but it's better than burning imported Indonesian coal, as we currently are doing at Huntly. I just think that's...
I can't have a laugh at that.
Well, you got to have a laugh. It is ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
It's just ridiculous. So some of this climate conversation is about practicalities as much as it is the theory, and as much as it is about the sort of the purity of the discussion. I think we have to be practical. The other thing is that our objective is net zero 2050. It's not net zero 2023. We've committed to a pathway over the next 28 years. And there will be multiple changes of government in that next 28 years. So what's really important from my point of view, and I think all of our points of view, is that zero carbon legislation was passed in our parliament without dissent. I think that's quite remarkable. Quite remarkable.
So you're saying that all the differences of parliament that will come through to 2050, hopefully you're all pointing in that same direction, right?
That's exactly it, Brett. So the direction is set. Will there be argument and discussion around the detail? Hell yes. And that's actually healthy. That's I think that's a good thing. We would all agree, I think, with the possible exception of one party in the parliament, that we should have, for instance, a taxpayer-funded access for all health system. But we'd argue about how much the nurses should be paid, how many hip operations there should be, where the new hospital should be, all that sort of stuff. We argue the detail, but we agree the principle. Similarly, education. We would all, I think, agree, with the exception of maybe one party.
You're not going to name that party?
Well, it's the ACT Party. But they make their position very clear, and they're entitled to a view.
Yeah.
But
you need diversity.
So we would say in education, access for all, taxpayer-funded education system, but we argue about what should be in the curriculum, how much the teachers should be paid, how many kids should be in the class, where the schools should be. We argue all that stuff. I think it's pretty much the same in climate policy. We agree the direction, we agree the budgets, we agree the commitment, but we will have arguments about what are the best methodologies for encouraging EV uptake, for instance. Some things will be better than others, and I think that's healthy. I don't have a problem with that. I think that's a good thing. And
EV uptake, how do you think that's going to be best done? Because I've been hearing on the radio a little bit lately about the what do you call it, a rebate or whatever?
Fee-bate.
Yeah.
It's a fee-bate scheme.
And that's sort of, I heard that the importers had a problem with it, and is that's a current topic of conversation?
It is a topic. Yeah, because again, that's
like, what would be a better option?
Well, that is an area that is an area where we would disagree with the current government, because we see that as basically a reverse Robin Hood scheme.
So it's taken from the fossil fuel drivers and giving it to the EV drivers,
but
right?
From people who have little choice at the moment about
what they
drive in terms of, if you're a chippy or a farmer or something, you want to have a ute, and right at the minute, in years to come it'll be different, but right at the moment there really aren't any options in the EV market. They'll come. So those people are being punished by having to pay a tax on those purchases to fund people like me who actually do have a choice about what kind of EV I drive, and frankly I can probably afford to pay it if I chose to. I mean, I really like those new Teslas. I don't know that I can afford those, one of those, but
I would get one if I were you.
Well, I tell you what, I test drove one. They took me on a test drive in Auckland, the Tesla people. They are magnificent cars. They're very, very lovely cars. But still, those people who can afford those cars, frankly, don't need taxpayer support from other New Zealanders. I think they can buy them. I would rather
you can't like means test a car by.
I don't know. In some states, and this is, I'm not talking about policy here. I'm just talking about concepts. So there's a state in America, and I've forgotten which one it is, who are incentivising or subsidising low and middle income families into EVs. And they're doing that for two reasons. Firstly, because those people probably couldn't get into them otherwise. But secondly, because for a low and middle income family, transport is a disproportionately large part of their weekly budget.
It sure is, especially at the moment.
That's right, especially at the moment. So often those people in that income bracket will have old dungers. They are hopelessly fuel inefficient, and they're also mechanically unreliable. So if they blow a radiator or something like that, that's going to cost them $1,000. They haven't got the money. That blows the whole family budget, and it just creates enormous stress and strain. And plus the running cost of the gas-guzzling older car, very expensive, particularly at the moment. So if you can get them into a low emissions EV, for instance, you not only are helping with the fleet transfer to get to decarbonise the fleet, but you're actually really providing a much better equitable outcome for a family, because a much lesser proportion of their weekly budget is going to be spent on transport, because the cost of running an EV is negligible, and there's literally not much that can go wrong with them. There isn't a radiator, there isn't a gearbox, there isn't a muffler, there isn't a diff. All that stuff just isn't there. So I haven't written off the I think more nuanced approach to incentivising EV uptake.
No, I've changed my mind. I want an EV. I would bring it in.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. Once you drive one, you want one. Have you driven one?
I have not. No.
Well, sometime I'll take you for a spin. You can drive the Hyundai, the little mighty Hyundai, as long as you don't mind driving around in a car that's got my name splattered all over
that's
it.
That's all right.
Just don't give anyone the fingers. That's not good.
No, I think the EVs are the way of the future. Really, I mean, in a manner of speaking. Well, they're on the pathway to the point that will be great in the future.
And I see your points with when you talk about the farmers and the youths, because they need those. But as you said, they need them. If it's a business that need them, yeah, but like it would make sense they would have to pay for more then, wouldn't it? If they need it. It's just something that demands that, and they're already causing a lot of those gas emissions. Anyway, is it a big problem to target them and make them pay for more if they're already causing that anyway?
Well, no more than, say, a builder or a bricklayer that wants to have a ute. I mean, the tool that the government has put in place is a very blunt instrument. And all I'm saying is that I think that there are other more equitable, fairer ways of incentivising the decarbonisation of our transport fleet than a blunt tax that subsidises people who do have choice and can afford it.
This is a ute tax.
That's right.
Correct?
It's basically a ute tax. So another example is if we are to decarbonise our light vehicle fleet, actually much better if we can convert commercial fleets in volume than trying to get you into an EV, you into an EV, you into an EV. That's by comparison a relatively slow way of doing it. If we can get businesses, and the biggest buyers of light vehicles in the country are commercial businesses, and if we can somehow provide them with a sufficient rationale for getting large numbers of vehicles in their fleet, then in 2 or 3 years' time they go into the second-hand market, and your quantum is much faster.
Let's go to the mining topic, because there's a good one that I'm just gonna say a comment before even ask you the question, and then you can tell me if you know anything about it or not. I heard from a friend that he was asking a politician, a candidate, about the mining, because here in the Coromandel there's a big thing. People don't like the Oceania coming and planning their things in Kūaotunu or whatever. And in my view, we have horrible examples like in Waihi. I just look at that place and I feel bad. It just looks bad. You know, we're susceptible to natural disasters. And I don't know, I could be wrong, but like Waihi doesn't look like the coolest place to be with lifestyle and everything. Like, it doesn't seem the money that is getting out of there, it's going back to the community. But I don't want to make it as a statement because I'm not sure. But by the looks, you know, when you go to a place and you're like, this doesn't look like it's funded by gold at all. But anyway, the friend said that the politician could not express an opinion against it because he would have to deal with consequences from the Oceania, and maybe he would even be out of the meetings that they would have. And then I was thinking, that doesn't make sense, because if you oppose something, you should be the one in those meetings. So what's your take on the Coromandel, and is that a thing?
Yeah, sure. Look, those are issues that are relevant and topical and contentious in this part of the world, and have been for decades. So there is nothing new. Let's just go back to Waihi for a moment. Waihi was not there before mining. Mining came, and then the town built up around Waihi. So it is a mining town. That is the history of Waihi. That is why the township exists, and that's the way it's been since Waihi was established 150 years ago, or whatever the number is. North of the Kopu-Hikuai Road, there has been now for nearly 40 years, nearly 50 years, a broad consensus and understanding that there will not be mining north of Kopu-Hikuai. And I support that, and I would be one of the first, if not the first, to be lying in front of a bulldozer if there was potential, if mining was to commence at, say, Kūaotunu or something like that. And you know my family history and my background with that part of this peninsula. I still have a place at Kūaotunu, and so it's very near and dear to me and my family. That said, the battles relating to mining north of Kopu-Hikuai were won and lost, I think, about 40 years ago. There isn't going to be mining north of Kopu-Hikuai for several reasons. First of all, because we live in a country that has some of the most rigid and high-level regulatory controls on mineral extractions in the world. Our Resource Management Act, which many people choose to dislike, actually in this case is our friend. Because the threshold for mining is enormously high. I think that's a good thing. I think that's appropriate. The second reason that I don't lie awake at night worrying about mining north of Kopu-Hikuai is because I just don't think there would ever be in New Zealand social license for that to occur. I just don't think it would ever be able to be done, because the uprising from New Zealanders, not just Coromandel people, but New Zealanders, would be so massive that it just simply wouldn't be palatable. Wouldn't
you are
wouldn't
an
be
optimist.
Possible. No, I'm very sure of it. There is a big difference between exploration licenses and mining, like a massive difference. Now, sometimes I get emails from people who say, oh, well, we've got these terrible exploration licenses at Kūaotunu, therefore there must be mining. No, exploration licenses are very common over a very big percentage of the New Zealand landmass. That does not mean there will be mining. So I don't lose any sleep over it. I'm not worried about it because I know that for, as I say, the two reasons. Firstly, the social licence reason, and secondly, the regulatory reason. I don't think it could start. And there's a third reason, and that is that whenever I've had discussions with the Oceania mining people, I've said, look, don't even think about it. Because you just never get there, and I think they get that. I mean, they are commercial people. They have to account to their shareholders and stakeholders just as any other business does. So they I think understand that the war and the battle that would occur would be one that they wouldn't win. So that's always been the message that I've given their chief manager or their senior management team over the years that I've had an opportunity. And before them, it was Newmont. So, whoever continues to do that. I think south of Kopuhikuwai, I think that's a different story. We are a society that relies on extractive minerals for much of the things that we take for granted in our day-to-day life. Looking around the studio here, we wouldn't have a studio like this if we didn't have extractive minerals to make the equipment that we use, or the devices, the electronic devices that we use, and much of the lifestyle that we lead. So we have to get those minerals from somewhere. And again, it's a bit like the offshore oil and gas. There are, I think, good reasons why we would want to get some of that domestically and how we can. So doesn't mean that all mining is good, but it equally doesn't mean that all mining is bad either. So I think there's a time and a place, and I've always taken the view, still do take the view, that if the regulatory thresholds can be met, and it's within the law of the land, then I'm okay with it. But those companies all know that they need to have the goodwill of communities and the country in order to operate. And if they can't do that, if they don't have that, then they can't have a business. That's true of any business, actually. It's not just mining. That's true of any business. If you're a shonky car dealer and you don't have the goodwill of your customers and community, you won't be in business either. Then
we go back to that argument of the recycling. How are we managing our waste, and how much are we recycling to bring some of those elements back, that we can minimize the mining to a point that is not that important. We had these conversations a few times here, and then we can also go back right at the start with consumerism, right? Like, how much do we actually need as society to give mining as an excuse? I get your point, because as you said, it's around us. But the philosophical question doesn't come to the table that often, like telling people, oh, but we have to. It's like, well, do we? Are we giving the environment away for our own what? For what? So
I can buy a new TV.
So you can buy a new TV every year because it changed the thickness or whatever. Yeah. But yeah, I get your point, and I appreciate how you putting clearly at the table. But the philosophical questions always go.
Well, let's just talk about recycling for a minute, because we don't recycle as well as we could or should.
Agreed.
And we've got a lot.
Myself included.
Well, we've got a lot that we could be doing a whole lot better. We just had last weekend our National Party conference in Christchurch, and we had a Blue Greens breakfast. And the guy that was speaking to us is a glass recycler who is his specialty area. The business is called 5R Solutions, and they're a Christchurch-based company, and their primary recycling is flat glass. So windows, car windscreens, that sort of stuff, which until recently was all going to landfill. And what this guy was saying, which is right, if you put glass into a landfill, it stays there. It doesn't go anywhere. It never deteriorates. It's there forever.
It's inert, eh? It's not
it's inert. It's just there forever. So this guy is now recycling and exporting for a profit waste flat glass windows and things that all used to go, and windscreens. And he hopes to be able to very shortly. It will mean that 100% of car windscreens can be recycled through his business for New Zealand. I think that's wonderful, but that's just a small drop in the bucket. So the point I'm making is that we don't recycle particularly well. We don't, for instance, have a nationwide curbside recycling standard. And why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem for us here in the Coromandel because we separate glass in our little in our curbside recycling. In Auckland, they don't. They put glass in their wheelie bin along with their tin cans and their aluminium and their newspaper and their cardboard. And so what happens when people come on holiday here in the Coromandel from Auckland? Many of them just start putting glass in with what we put in our wheelie bins, and they don't. And then that contaminates the other recycling, which just makes it a whole lot more difficult to recycle. So we are really bad at sorting as a nation. We're really bad at curbside stuff. We could be a whole lot better. And we're really bad at not at grasping a circular economy approach to much of what we do. Now, the weirdest thing I find is that if you think back to our grandparents, and certainly our great-grandparents, they used to do it. They didn't call it a circular economy. They didn't call it recycling. They didn't call it all the fancy words that we now use, or waste minimisation or anything. They just did it because it was
the way you did it.
It was just the way you did it.
Yeah.
And your vegetable scraps and what have you were dug into your vegetable garden outside, and your glass jars and bottles and things were all reused and recycled. And when you knitted cardigans and pullovers and things like that, when you grew out of them or they wore out, you undid them and knitted them into socks or slippers or something.
Doing that.
Yeah, but mine as well. So those are things that actually previous generations they did the right thing. They didn't have the words that we have for it today. Today we have the words for it, but we don't do the right thing. And I just think there's a perverseness about that we just as a society and as a nation need to get a whole lot better at. And we can't just keep digging holes in the ground, filling them up with stuff that we've thrown away, and then when that hole is full, we cover it up and then we dig another hole. Surely there is a more intelligent, finessed, nuanced approach that can reduce that need. And I think science and technology has a lot of answers in that area, but we've got to get better at doing all this stuff. One of the joys of my job is that you do get to meet and talk to people who are doing exciting and imaginative things. And I had a case just recently where the company is called EcoGas, and in Auckland Council is about to start a program that there will be another little container that you put on your curbside which will be for food waste, food scraps. And this company, EcoWaste, has the contract with Auckland Council to take this stuff away. They will put all this bio-waste into an anaerobic digester, big one, at Reparoa. And then in this outfit, EcoGas, they don't see themselves as a waste company. They don't see themselves as a recycling. They see themselves as an energy company. And they will capture the gas, bottle it, and then sell it. And the gas that they don't use, some of it will be actually potentially turned into sustainable air fuels, which is another exciting opportunity. But the rest of it, they actually burn it as gas and then turn that into electricity that goes into the national grid. Now, I think that's really exciting. But the big part that really impressed me was that the food scraps from Auckland was just a small part of where they got their bio product from. Their big feed source will actually be horticulture and the forestry sector, all that horrible slash that's left after, you know, when they clear fell pine trees and you're left with all that stuff. They'll be able to use that as well. And I just think those sorts of things are really exciting and give cause for optimism and hope.
Would it make sense though that the problem, because you said all the generations would just do what it was right, but probably because the comfort was, it was not as much as today. Today is very easy, everything is plastic, it comes very handy, cheap, and it's ready for you, it's convenient. Cheap. And the richest people in the country and probably around the world, they own these packaging companies, right? And then we ship to other countries, and then we get rid of we don't see it anymore, but we just send it somewhere else. Would it make? I understand that us as people, as society, we have a big responsibility on that, but would it make sense to target the producers, the people who are actually doing those packagings, to start with the change? Because that would make it easier, right? If the packaging is a bit more, easy to get rid of or whatever.
Well, when Brett buys his new TV in 10 years' time, the TV will be a very small part of the packaging. So I had to buy a new TV a year or so ago because my old one died, and these days we don't repair things like we used to. So I bought a new TV. I couldn't believe how much polystyrene and plastic and cardboard and tape there was in the packaging. And then I unwrapped this thing, and then what do I do with all this? What do I do with all this packaging? What do I do with all the polystyrene? And I have literally no option but to, with the cardboard, I can sort of chop it up into smaller bits, and then I can put that in my wheelie bin. But the polystyrene and stuff, that just goes to landfill. Polystyrene's a dreadful product. So I'm with you, Leo. I think actually that increasingly it will be not through rules and legislation and regulation and government saying you must. I actually think customers and stakeholders and shareholders in business are going to demand from manufacturers that they start producing bull and
or send it back,
or send it back.
Right,
exactly.
That's the guy from Seagulls we had on here.
Yeah, he got in touch. I think he's got some good news for us. So
he was saying
the Seagull Centre in Thames.
Yeah,
good outfit.
He came to the show.
Yeah, he came to the show, and he was saying that it would be good to bring in where you pay for the disposal of your TV and your packaging
at the point of purchase.
At the point of purchase, yeah.
And so that's product stewardship is what that's
I thought that's a really good idea. I'd never heard of it before until then.
Yeah.
Would you like to say something, or
no?
Because I have so many cool topics to touch. I don't want to drag this, but there's one topic before we go for the audience.
No, let's go. Get speed running.
I just want to mention something that I feel like is quite relevant. I haven't checked the questions from the audience yet. Have we got some, Taylor? Yeah, cool. But I think there will be something related to. Have you heard about the fishing competition? There was a bit of a controversy recently
with the school. And it was a scholarship, I think, or something. Like that.
Yeah. Are you familiar with that?
Only in broad terms. That originally the school was Mercury Bay Area School was going to encourage students to participate. And then the principal made a decision to reverse that. Is that right?
Well, there was different points of views. Again, like we cannot open all the things, because it happened there. But also, I didn't have access to everything. But what came to all of us was that there was teachers who had a different opinion on that approach to the fishing competition. But like that is a topic that I would like to talk about. But also, in an overall sense, because for example in Hahei we have the beautiful reserve that you can go. I don't know if you have been there and actually seen the beautiful big snappers, and it's an area
I'm not a great diver, but I'm very familiar with the marine reserve. Yeah,
that attracts a lot of tourism and people coming from that. So I just kind of want to jump in there. I know that our conversation will evolve as we go, but I just wanted your take on all those matters. A lot of people say, "Oh, this is a place for fishermen," and then I feel like there's a bit of an excuse to be quite harsh to other views, and sometimes people get a little bit it gets too much out of control when actually it's a subject that we should pay more attention and be a bit more mindful of what we're doing to our sea life. So I just wanted some insights from you, and then we go from there.
Yeah, really good. And again, big subject. Recreational fishing is huge around the peninsula, of course.
Do you do it? Do you fish?
I don't get much opportunity. I can't remember actually the last time I went fishing. It would be several years ago. But I do enjoy fishing and have enjoyed fishing. I'm not very good at it. But certainly I have in the past, but not recently, and that's more a time issue than anything else. It's not a philosophical issue. But recreational fishing is big around the region, and of course where we are, we're in part of the Hauraki Gulf. and every single environmental indicator for the Gulf is heading the wrong way. And has been for decades. So the Gulf is in not a very good state.
That's so I should interrupt. So that's refreshing to hear, like a politician say that. I'm happy to hear that. Carry on.
Well, sadly, it's not good news.
Oh no, it's not good news. I'm just happy that there's someone who people accepting it.
The acceptance of the poor and declining state of the environmental health of the Gulf is relatively easy point to come to. The bigger question, the harder question is, well, what to do about it? And so several years ago, there was a very big piece of work done called Sea Change, which was essentially a spatial plan for the Gulf. Almost nothing from that great big plan has been adopted or put into action. The Gulf has its own statute, it's got its own law that creates the Hauraki Gulf Forum, an unwieldy group of politicians mostly, but a group that has over the years, I think, tried to do the best they can, but largely been unsuccessful, not through want of good effort, by the way. I think they've tried, but it just hasn't worked, and it's got worse. So part of that is because the Hauraki Gulf is the most intensively recreated piece of marine space in our whole EEZ. If you think about the population that lives around the foreshore and close to the Hauraki Gulf, close to 2.5 million New Zealanders who like to fish, yacht, scuba dive, swim, do all the things that people like to do in the ocean. So it's always going to be intensely recreated, intensely populated, and then add into that the effect of what happens on the land has an enormous impact on what's happening in the Gulf. And we've had rapid human intensification, intensive farming, runoff, sedimentation, all those sorts of things. So there isn't one simple solution, but collectively and as individuals, we've got to just try and turn the fortune of the Gulf around as best we can. Now, I'm not opposed to recreational fishing.
When you say recreational, do you mean like sports fishing?
Sports fishing, I don't have a particular problem with sports fishing. I know some people do. I'm not particularly fazed by it, but some people obviously that's an issue. But I think the bigger issue is the overall management and the state, the precarious state of the health of the whole Gulf. And so we desperately need a new framework, a new way of changing and looking after the Gulf for future generations. Because that's part of our Kiwiness, actually, is going out and enjoying the ocean and its bounty and its all the great things that can happen in the water. Not the least of which is just the visual aspect. It looks bloody marvellous. It looks fantastic.
Beautiful out there.
It does look beautiful. So I think we've all got an obligation to do that. I don't have an instant answer, but I do know that what we currently have isn't working. Funnily enough, we've got our Blue Greens Forum this weekend in Auckland that I mentioned earlier, and that a big focus of that is around the health of the Gulf. And we've got speakers that are coming from commercial fishing interests, from the recreational sector. I don't know about the sports fishing, but anyway, we've got, and we'll be having exactly this kind of debate this coming weekend. So if anyone wants to come and participate in that, they're most welcome. Just let me know.
Are they televised or anything, or like?
No, we're not as sophisticated with the equipment that you've got here.
Need a couple of youngins to come through, eh?
Yeah, we've got a few youngins, but they don't bring all their kit with them. But certainly it's an active forum, and people who participate in it will be, I think, quite interested in the discussion, because I think there is a mood for positive change that will ultimately bring the sort of things that we need. Marine reserves are actually a part of that. One of the issues that we have at the moment is, and this does worry me, is that the Waikato Regional Council has recently put forward a discussion document about their coastal planning ideas and on objectives, and one of those objectives was to create several new marine reserves around the Gulf. I'm unhappy about that because the creation of marine reserves have traditionally and by way of our law been the preserve of central government, not local government. And personally, I think that is an overreach by local government. They're doing that on the back of a case that occurred in the Bay of Plenty Regional Council, where they created a marine reserve around the Astrolabe Reef, which is Motiti Island. That was where the Rena went aground. Then there was objection to the creation of that. They took that to the Environment Court, and the Environment Court upheld the ability of the Regional Council to create a marine reserve. So Waikato are now looking at doing something similar, and that's an issue that is causing significant concern to locals in our part of the world at the moment.
I wonder if the people from the sports fishing, if they would have some actions to actually preserve the sea, because that would be a bit of a clash of interest, wouldn't it?
Not necessarily a clash of interest, though. Like they could try doing something and going, hey, why don't we not fish this certain area and just make their own reserve, and then that would encourage the growth of other fish. You know,
sort of like a rahui.
Yeah,
but then they're still taking fish from other areas, and some people will say abuse, or some people will say hurt, and then taking back, and then you're preserving there. It's like
if that's your point of view, though, then that's going to happen whether there's a reserve or not.
Is it something that is arguable though? Getting a fish out of a place and for entertainment and putting back.
I don't know.
Is it entertainment?
It depends on what you consider entertainment.
That's what I'm asking.
Well, me personally,
yeah.
I've got no problem with sports fishing. I don't agree with, say, for example, catching.
Would you do it with any animal?
With any animal?
Any. Would you put a hook in the mouth of any animal and drag it?
No.
Huh.
Do you want to know why?
Rest my case. Would you do it with me? Would you put a
right now?
Yeah.
No.
Carry on. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, I'm not sure why I think that. I haven't really thought that through. But you're right. I wouldn't put a hook in the mouth of a dog.
Cat.
Definitely a cat, but not a dog.
No,
maybe because they're smarter and they're perceived to have a.
Marlins are very intelligent. Dolphins as well.
Okay, let me rephrase. Well, I'm not hooking a dolphin.
People don't do that.
I have hit a dolphin
right?
with a boat.
Exactly.
Though,
why you wouldn't do it with a dolphin then?
Because they're the same thing as a dog. Because
Speciesism is the name.
No, because I think that they are. I'm not saying they are. I feel as if they're smarter and that they would express their pain and emotion more in a way to me that would affect the way I feel. Whereas a marlin, for example, it feeds a lot of people, and I'm happy with someone catching it. Like that, how else?
But there's a big difference between catching it and eating, and then catching it, showing off, and putting it back.
I think that's even better.
But there's a lot of evidence that they don't even survive after.
There's also a lot of evidence that they do survive.
Just for fun. That's interesting.
Yeah, well, I would be more happy with someone keeping it for food.
Yeah.
If it was like, for example, they caught one, okay, and it was a big one, they'd be like, I'm going to keep this and I'm going to take it home and I'm going to eat it. If they catch smaller ones, usually when you tag and release, it's because you've caught something that might be like only 95 kg, so you tag it and put it back, right?
What do you think, Scott?
And then you don't, because there's no point keeping it.
I'm enjoying Brett trying to justify his position.
Yeah, well, I come up with these positions in my mind at the time, and then I try and justify them live on air. And it's not coming out very well.
Because we had, for example, Jean and Nicole from the land-based fishing, and they were talking about it with a very normal way of actually teaching the kids, of doing that. And I disagreed, but we were still having a conversation, and it's all good, so I'm just listening.
To be fair, it's probably because it's just been normal. I'm from Raglan once moved away from Waitak, but that was just a normal thing there. We used to go on the wharf and watch the trawlers come in and stuff like that. Now I don't necessarily agree with the trawlers.
I would put this one on that list, Scott.
Yeah,
I don't
like trawlers. I don't like trawlers now, but as a kid they were awesome, and I think that the marlin fishing was normalised for me. Maybe that's why I'm fine with it.
But you see, in previous times, people used to go and hunt elephants and for the tusks and go on safari. These days, they take cameras instead of guns. So, things change.
Things change.
I have got friends who go hunting with cameras now instead of.
This one might go to that list, Scott, of crazy things that we were doing.
Okay,
I like that one, man. I like that. You were very honest and blunt with that one because I think the same. I actually say this in a lot of shows. I'm like, in a few years, I wonder what we're going to think is crazy that we're doing. Go for a question while I have the look in the
elephants
audience.
For sure. Hunting elephants is crazy.
But they didn't think so 50 or 100 years ago.
Yeah. Whales. It's a very interesting. Yeah, I come from a whaling family.
So it's deep in the
maybe
DNA.
That's why I'm all right with the marlin. So I really want to ask about, because I don't understand this, and I would like if you could explain it if you know about it. Is the three waters that I am aware it's an issue because I see the signs up everywhere saying stop three waters. Could you run me through what three waters is?
Sure.
And why councils might be opposed to it?
Sure.
And I would like to just understand. I know three waters is
just first, it would be nice to know your connection with the council as well, because sometimes I don't know what is the connection you have or if you have any power to.
Yep. So I don't have any connection with the council. So we have sort of two tiers of government: local government, which is your regional councils and district councils, and then central government. So I'm very involved in central government, what happens in Parliament, what happens in Wellington.
Would the mayor be closer to that, to the council side?
Yes,
compared
absolutely.
To you? Okay.
Absolutely. So Three Waters is just a shorthand title given to what is referred to as wastewater. So that's the sewerage, the stuff you send down the drain when you have a shower or you clean your teeth, and that's wastewater. The second water is drinking water, potable water, and the third water is storm water. So the stuff that falls on your roof and then has to be put in a drain and then channeled out, but not mixed with your wastewater. Okay, so those are three waters: drinking water, wastewater, stormwater. As I say, three waters is just a code abbreviation for those things.
Yep.
Those the administration of those three waters and the provision of them, so providing drinking water, looking after your sewerage and your wastewater, and looking after your stormwater, has traditionally in New Zealand been the role of local government, of councils. And over 100 years or so, ratepayers have funded the infrastructure that goes into wastewater treatment plants, to sewage systems, to reservoirs for drinking water, for water treatment for drinking water and all that sort of stuff, and also for the provision of stormwater. So ratepayers have paid for those assets. Now, what the current government wants to do is remove the day-to-day control and administration of that infrastructure and assets into four large, what they call water entities. And the difficulty is that those assets would be nominally still in the name of the local council, but the local council wouldn't have control over them. And that's the sort of the nub of the concern about representation and democracy. We in the Coromandel would be part of what's referred to as Entity B. That's an area that is basically from about Pukekohe down to, I think, about, without looking at the map, probably around Lake Taupo.
Okay.
Takes into account 22 district councils. So all the water infrastructure of the three waters for those 22 district councils in that area would be amalgamated into one entity. And our council, the Thames Coromandel District Council, for instance, would have very little influence or representation on that governing body of that group. So the argument is that ratepayers who have invested over generations in the infrastructure would lose effectively democratic representation and influence over what happened to that water stuff. And why is that a big problem? it's a big problem because some councils have been better at investing in Three Waters infrastructure than others. Some have been abysmal. Some have really underinvested, and in some parts of the country, we have got really big problems with water infrastructure in those three areas. But in other parts of the country, it's pretty good. And so people who live in places where it's pretty good say, well, you're going to take control of those assets away from us, form this new big entity, and then we will have to pay again to help subsidise the payment of those ones that have underperformed for years. And so that's the nub of the kind of issue. Why is the government wanting to do it in the first place at all? It's because this is their response to, you might remember it was about 5 years ago, it might have been 6 years ago, there was a very bad problem with water quality in Havelock North. And literally thousands of people got sick, and there were some deaths as a result as well. So after that, they did a big commission of inquiry. The commission of inquiry said, you need to restructure, and then they didn't say how to restructure, but this is what the current government's plan is. And it's based largely on a model that has worked in Scotland, where they have a similar population to us, but it's a far more densely populated piece of geography, not separated by two islands and three islands and three main islands and big pieces of water,
huge amounts of farmland,
and huge amounts of farmlands with a population that is as diversely spread as we are as a nation. So that's the nub of the big issue, and Three Waters is just an abbreviated code for that whole debate. So does that make it clear?
It does, and I can see why people would not necessarily want that to go ahead.
Yeah. So however, by having some sort of like someone in charge, it would force everyone to do their part. Would that make sense? Because you're saying in the past, some people made an effort, some others not that much. As soon as you have someone saying we gotta do our part, at least there would be one positive side of the things of like, now it is a thing, because like I understand the debate.
Issue who's paying for it, right?
Well, that's the bottom line, isn't
right,
it?
who's paying for
and
it,
the people who have done a good job don't want to, and understandably, then subsidise those that haven't been doing a good job.
So you're right, though. There is a positive for it, for the people who aren't doing such a good job will be forced to buck up their ideas, but at the cost of someone else, essentially.
And then you have the sort of the more the sort of second level debate, which is goes back to basically the democratic representation. So there's the old principle of no taxation without representation, and effectively you would be funding through your rates bill, because that's how they would still collect that money.
So it's still ratepayers who've got to pay for it.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it was these taxpayers who were paying for it.
Well, they're ratepayers too, pretty much, either.
Oh, well, yeah. No, I actually thought it would free up money for...
Oh, you thought you'd get a cheap ride.
Oh, yeah, I thought my rates would come down.
Well, I don't think that's quite how it's going to work.
Yeah, rates never come down, eh?
Not in my experience, no. But look, so that's the nub of the issue. It's an issue around asset ownership and governance, and then there is the question of who pays, and then there is the question of representation and sort of how your voice as a ratepayer is heard in a group that is not representative particularly of that big area.
No, I'm glad. Thank you. Thanks for clearing that up.
Should we bring the audience in?
Yeah, I can't stop thinking about this hook in the mouth of a dog, though. I think I might have changed my mind again. But you should ask some more questions. It's all right.
So just to get a segue on what you just said, I'm going to skip the line, but I'm going to go back to all of them, because that was a good point that you brought. Because Mr. Fabian Roberts, he asks, Scott,
what does he want?
When was the last time you found yourself changing your mind about an issue, finding out that you were wrong on an issue topic, and how did you express this change professionally?
The last time I did that was to do with a change to rules around protesting outside medical facilities that were performing abortions. And you might remember that there was a piece of legislation that the government introduced that would prohibit people protesting outside hospitals within a certain distance. And at the first reading of that legislation, I opposed it. And then I heard submissions at Select Committee and also listened to representations from people who had strong views on that issue. And then I changed my mind, and I decided actually there should be a setback area away from where abortions were being performed, that protesters should have to be back a certain distance. So I changed my mind on
So
that.
was your thought process like as in the right to protest, and then the mind change was the right to have a safe abortion?
Exactly. So I have a...
Because I can understand the conundrum, like, because when you're saying it, I'm like, well, of course you want to have an area where people can be safe, but then I also understand the right to protest as well.
And that was really the issue. It was a question of there are many people who have a view that abortion is wrong, and they have, I think, a democratic right to present their view, but it's a question of where they do it.
200 metres away.
It's where they do it and how they do it.
Yeah.
And so I changed my mind on that.
Fantastic. And he also says, how is it that Brett looks 100% more attractive than Leo tonight? Mind-blowing reversal from early episodes. ALTBAYS is evolving.
Thank you.
So you're
Whoever
saying,
that is, God bless you.
That's Fabian. So you're saying...
Thank you, he's a handsome man. What I said.
So you're saying that Brett being more attractive than me tonight is that ALTBAYS is evolving?
I've lost 6 kgs too.
Wow.
Go carnivore diet. God damn it. Are you shitting though?
Every couple of...
This is too much information.
Sorry, no, because
this is too much. You didn't tell me this.
It's a carry-on from a previous one.
We talked about last episode that he was not, so I'm just checking.
I don't want to know about your bowel movements.
Every 2 or 3 days. All right, move it on. 2 or 3 days.
It's been 3 days.
2 or 3. No, I went today. But
You need more fibre, man.
I've got 0 fibre in my diet at the moment.
Wow.
Hey, and he knows about nutrition as well. Fantastic. Scott, and that was a cool one. That was actually Fabian's first question. He says, Kia ora, Scott, do you feel that scientists, artists, and tradespeople are underrepresented in government? This is not to say that are being oppressed, more to ask about the pathways to leadership. Cool.
It's a good question. Our parliament is what it is called, a House of Representatives. And there's no doubt in my mind that our parliament today is more representative than it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. Is it entirely representative? I mean, it's 120 people out of a population of 5 million. So there are always going to be underrepresentative elements of our community. But I tell you what, I've seen some of those parliamentarians, and some of them are very good actors. Some of them are very, very good. Some of them are very good musicians. My colleague Paul Goldsmith, for instance, who would have thought? He's an incredibly competent pianist, and he can play a piano and tinkle the ivories like the best of them. But probably the arts are not as well represented as maybe, for instance, the law or social organisations or trade unions, for that matter. A very large number of trade unionists in the parliament.
That was cool. Thank you. Hanako asked a question that I think we covered, but if you feel free to add anything to that. Hi, Scott. What are your thoughts on the housing crisis in Whitianga, Coromandel, Tairua, Thames, etc.? And what would your solution be on this topic? I think we covered it, right?
I think we did, but the short answer, we need to build more homes.
And she says, don't forget to talk about the sandwich. Well, the sandwich is...
This is more about your dietary.
There's more. No, not about...
I don't eat sandwiches.
He's not eating carbs, but
I don't.
The thing is, a few years ago, Taylor woke up very early. He was late to work, and then he decided that I don't know the whole story, but he went to grab some food quickly in town. He was like, I'm just going to get some food, and off I go to work. So he went to Subway. Who served Taylor?
Ho. Did you? Do you work at Subways?
I did for a few hours.
It was not good. It only lasted for a few hours.
Did they pay you?
No, they didn't. Oh, no, actually they did. They gave me a Subway sandwich at the end of it.
Yes.
Yeah, they did. So I got paid in kind. But it was the local Subway owners who were doing a promotion, and I got to make Subway sandwiches only for a couple of hours.
How crazy.
Yeah.
That guy.
That was a couple of years ago. That was good.
Hey,
I hadn't
Taylor, was
realised
it
that you were
very good?
late for work that day. Was it okay? Was the sandwich all right?
It wasn't as good as when someone who normally do it, but it was okay, man.
So you think I should stick with my day job?
You stick with your day job, for sure.
I'll tell you what, after a couple of hours of making Subway sandwiches, I had a very new heightened respect for Subway sandwich makers. They do a very good job.
I think they're artists.
They are artists.
Shout out. How do you become a legislator, lawmaker, and what would you need to study to do that role?
Well, to become a member of our parliament and therefore a legislator, you have to get elected. So you've got to stand for parliament, and then you have to convince people to vote for you and your party usually. Because I think one of the things that is not often well understood by some MPs is that often it's not people voting for Scott Simpson as a person. They are voting for me because I am the National Party candidate in the Coromandel. Mm-hmm. So it's a combination of the person plus the brand, if I can put it that way. And just speaking about Subway, I mean, being a party MP, as all MPs are in our parliament, you're kind of like the franchise manager for your brand. So that's sometimes the way I kind of see it. Does that make sense?
Can you run as an independent? Like they?
Yeah, you can, but it's not often that independents get elected.
Okay.
This is a great one. Scotty!
Yo!
Do you agree Whitianga needs a bowling alley? Thanks, Chloe.
Oh, it's at Chloe, must be.
Okay, so just before you
There's got to be some history to this. Is this a question that comes up every time?
It is. And Chloe, just for your information, we were at a party on the weekend, and this random ass person came to Taylor and I and said, "Oh, I was listening from some locals that they were considering starting the bowling alley. So your idea is going good, girl. Keep doing that." She asked this question to everyone who comes to the show. What do you think?
Well, I kind of like bowling. I haven't been bowling for years. But do you know the only thing I dislike about bowling alleys is
wearing someone else's shoes.
Yeah, that shoe business. That is really, I just find that kind of weird.
Why can't I wear my own shoes?
Well, there's got to be some. Yeah, but anyway, that's kind of vaguely off-putting.
It is a good idea, though, right? The bowling alley in town. There you go.
Yeah, but have we got a big enough market for it? Have we got a?
We would in summer, but not the winter market.
But isn't that the problem with so many of our businesses around the peninsula? Because most businesses here have this really unusual cash flow model where something like 80% of some businesses' revenue for the whole year will occur over a 2-month period. Now, that's a very hard business model for many businesses to manage their way through.
So we don't vote for MP this year. It's next year. Is that correct?
Well, unless the government collapses.
Right.
Look
at your smile.
No, I think it'll almost certainly be next year.
Is it too early to ask if you are keen to run again, or if you would consider a different position in the party?
No, I'm certainly keen to run again, and so I hope that the good people of Coromandel will see fit to re-elect me again. But that's their decision.
How come you've never run for Prime Minister?
Oh, well, that's
you got to rephrase it. Have you run for Prime Minister before?
No, I haven't.
How come you never have?
Because I think that would be the toughest job in our Parliament, and actually there are more capable people to do that job than me. Okay. I recognise my limitations, and I take my hat off. I think no matter who the Prime Minister is, it's a very tough gig. It's a very tough job being Prime Minister. It's relentless.
So Luxon is going for it, right?
Luxon's going for it. And I think he'll make a very good Prime Minister. I think he'll make an extraordinarily good Prime Minister.
There you go. Have you heard about? Have you read anything about Luxon?
I haven't. You know, I mean, I know of him obviously. And if you want to give him any advice, it would be to get a little bit more on social media. I feel like, I mean,
Do you follow his social media? You do follow his Instagram?
I don't, but he doesn't.
Twitter.
He doesn't crop up anywhere naturally. Does he? He's maybe pump some money into the advertising dollars. I don't know how that works.
Well, you just go and it's a bit like the ALTBAYS. Just go and like the socials and follow that, and that's how it works.
I only follow two politicians, and one is
me,
is Auntie Jacinda, and one is you.
Oh, hey, I'm in rarefied company.
And I follow Chloe, the one that you voted against.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and Andrew's cousin Louise as well. I follow her.
Have you got a cousin? Is Louise a cousin of yours?
Louise Hutt.
Oh, no. I don't know. No, I thought you were talking about Louise Upston, maybe.
No,
I thought that would be interesting.
No, my wife's cousin Louise is running for councillor, I think, in Hamhurst.
Oh, okay, cool.
Is it more because of her ideas that you gave me that, or because of the Green Party itself?
Oh, you mean about Chloe Swarbrick?
Yeah.
No, I just think that Chloe strikes me as a very competent, talented, articulate person. And I think that she will realise that she doesn't have the answers to everything when she's about 40.
There you go.
I think that's fair.
It is fair. Yeah.
I know twice as much as I knew 10 years ago. And I know in 10 years' time, I'll realise that I only knew an eighth of what I thought I knew.
Fair enough. She's the mayor, right? In Auckland?
No, she's the Member of Parliament for Auckland Central.
Auckland Central. Yeah. That's right.
That was good to see some Greens representative in the city though.
And young faces, That's
it was
a cool
quite
thing.
surprising. Yeah. I was like, wow, I didn't see that coming. It's nice to have some change around instead of.
We've got
just
quite. I mean, as I said, a House of Representatives. So we've got there are a reasonable number of younger MPs, but again, it's a cross section. So that's as it should be.
Democracy, right?
Yeah, it's as it should be.
How come Epsom always votes ACT? Just quick fire questions.
Well, because the good people of Epsom are smart enough to understand that if they have an ACT constituency MP, that if ACT don't poll at 5%, then they will bring in an extra number of MPs. So the threshold for getting seats in our parliament, if you don't have a constituency, is 5% of the vote. And if you don't get 5% of the vote, say you only get 4.8% of the vote and no seat, then you get no representation in our parliament.
And that's what happened to like New Zealand First and Māori Party. Was it like
because they won one seat and then they got the second seat because they polled, I can't remember what the number was, but it's all a mathematical formula. So the good people of Epsom have figured that out. At the moment, ACT is polling well above 5%, so it's less important to them.
Okay.
But that's the historic reason.
It's David Seymour, right?
Yep.
So he is their local MP.
He's the local MP
currently now. So he obviously does a good job in his community to keep those people like voting for him.
One would hope so.
Well, they're still voting for him. I mean, I'm just curious because
I think in Epsom, Epsom is an interesting one because I think there is an element of tactical voting that occurs there to achieve that result that I've talked about.
Okay.
In Epsom in the past, the National Party has suggested to supporters that they should give their constituency vote to David Seymour and their party vote to National. Because actually in MMP, there's only really one vote that is important, and that's your party vote. Because to a degree, it doesn't matter how many constituency seats a party wins. I mean, it's always nice to win constituency seats, but the makeup of our parliament is determined by the party votes that are cast for individual parties.
Fantastic.
I've just always heard every election comes around, which hasn't been many for me, and I'm like, what is this? What's happening with Epsom?
It's bound to come up again.
Yeah.
But like I say, at the moment, ACT are polling higher than 5%, so it's less of a factor.
They're running a very intense social media presence.
Lots of advertising.
Yeah, lots of advertising. Yeah, I see them pop up in mine all the time.
ACT. There you go.
Must be what I'm talking about. Am I talking about?
Yeah.
Well, like bring nuclear power to New Zealand. No, I don't know. But I don't know.
But you know how that happens, because your devices, don't they say they listen to what you're doing?
I'm not into, no offence to ACT, but I'm not into...
But don't you think now that we've talked about hooks and dogs' faces that you're going to get a whole lot of social media stuff coming up about that.
Yeah, I should have turned my phone off.
Come. We're going to hashtag that.
I left my phone on and I should have turned it off.
It's been a great chat. Thank you so much. Would you like to? Is there anything you didn't cover before we wrap it up?
Are we going to wrap it up? Yep.
So I'll give you one
we
more.
We seem to have been going. How long have we been going?
A long time.
2 hours.
Good Lord, 2 hours.
2.5 hours.
Wow. Is anyone still watching?
Yes. Yes. And people watch actually most of it after the show, which is pretty cool. Yeah. So
I just have one last question here then. We'll ignore trying to figure out what political standing I am. So that's all right.
You wanted to know whether you're left or right.
Yeah, I don't know. Who cares? I would like to know, could you tell us something good or great that National has done that we would...
National?
Yeah.
That his party has done?
Yes. And then also that the Labour and the Greens might have done that you think they've done a good job of. Yeah. So all three of you, just the top things.
Oh, okay. Well,
are they the top three? We'll say, we're going to include ACT?
Look, I think the National Party has over the years excelled at providing good, pragmatic, sensible government. That's kind of what the National Party is famous for. It is no surprises, nothing wacky or strange or weird, pragmatic, sensible, sane government. So those would be those are the hallmarks.
Sane. Yeah,
that's kind of the hallmark, and that means that you get good outcomes in terms of infrastructure, in terms of a whole range of policy areas. So just broadly, that's about it. In terms of Labour, they certainly have been over the years, and again, it's not just one thing; it's a whole lot of things. They are and have been very good at bringing in what I would call societal changes that have been embedded in our political and sort of countrywide life. Mm-hmm. So they've been able to bring about change that probably couldn't have occurred otherwise. Mm-hmm. And if you think back historically, things like KiwiSaver, they instituted that I think in hindsight we would now say that was a very good thing. Probably should have happened years ago. And so they're quite good on that sort of stuff. The Greens, I think, have and this is a bit tricky for him at the moment, but I actually think that James Shaw has been doing a not unreasonable job. From my point of view, I find him easy to deal with. He's not at the extreme end of the Green Party, and that's probably a problem for him within his own party. Doesn't mean that I support or agree with everything that he says, but I think he's very committed, very sincere, and I think he does as good a job as he is allowed to do. So there's good in everything. Mm-hmm. And my dear old late mother used to say, basically, if you can't say something nice, don't say it at all. So I do try that, but occasionally, sorry, Mum, occasionally I get it wrong.
That's pretty good, man. That's the first time that I see a politician saying good things about another party.
Yes, you got to acknowledge that. Yeah. That's what it's all about, right? The respect and acknowledging that there are good things out there.
Well, at the end of the day, all politicians don't get out of bed in the morning and think, how can I piss people off today? How can I annoy people? How can I make things worse? That's not what politicians do. I would like to think, and I do think, that all politicians go to Wellington with good intentions. Whether they get to fulfil and achieve those intentions, that's a completely different matter. But I don't think politicians go to Wellington with the objective of doing harm. They don't.
Fantastic. Happy?
Yeah, that's good finish.
I'm happy too. Happy there? Ooh-wee. Okay.
Well, it's been a pleasure, guys. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you,
much,
thank you very
guys.
much, and maybe we can do it another time.
Yes, definitely.
And just because I don't spend much, almost nothing on social media advertising, Facebook is Scott Simpson MP. I'd really like, that's my main social media platform, and I'll put that nice selfie that I took earlier on, I'll put that up, and maybe a link to the ALTBAYS Show.
That would be cool if you could promote that. That would be awesome.
Thanks
I'm
very much.
sure a lot of people appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thanks for the pen.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thanks to you. And for you guys watching us at home, 9:30 and you're still up. Good job. Fantastic. This was a great show. Don't forget, now you can join our platform and become a member. Okay, you can give as little as $5 per month. You check the prices there, or you can give a one-off donation. If you go on our live chats, you can put whatever, $2, $10, $100.
Oh, 500 it went up to.
500 would be great, right?
it.
Why not? Why not? Why not? And but it's still the best way to support us. Subscribe to our channel, join our Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, so you can watch Brett dancing.
Yeah.
It's actually not happening, but
No, it's
it
not.
might at some
I don't think it's
stage.
ever going to happen.
You never know. Hey, I'll see you on Wednesday. Great shows coming this week. Peace.